Usually when you sit down to play a complex new video game, there's a tutorial, like a little pop-up that says, press this button to jump, or press this to check your inventory. It guides you and makes sure you understand the core mechanics before the real challenges show up. But when you look at the United States financial ecosystem, it is exactly like a video game where the most important rules are hidden deep, deep in the terms and conditions. I mean, the tutorial is completely missing, yet society expects you to play as if you've already read the manual twice.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, if you don't know the rules, the penalties aren't just, a game over screen where you try again. The penalties are very real, very persistent financial drains. They are the overdraft fees triggered by these hidden algorithms, the invisible taxes added at the register, and a deeply mysterious three-digit number that literally dictates exactly where you are allowed to live.
Right. Well, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are cracking the code of a system that causes endless anxiety for newcomers and lifelong citizens alike. We are decoding American money culture. And we have a fantastic mission today for you, the listener. If you are trying to figure out why your landlord cares so deeply about your credit history, or why your paycheck is like thousands of dollars smaller than the salary you actually negotiated, or why a simple dinner with friends requires a degree in complex mathematics, this deep dive is your ultimate shortcut to being financially informed.
Because it's not just about dollars and cents, really. Understanding this system is like having a sociological decoding ring. The way a society handles its daily transactions tells you everything about its underlying values. We are pulling from an extensive, highly detailed financial survival guide designed originally for immigrants, international students, and advanced English learners. But frankly, the mechanics we are going to explore today are things a huge portion of native-born Americans still do not fully grasp.
I am constantly surprised by how much of this I just blindly accept without knowing the actual mechanics. So, let's unpack this. We have to start with the most immediate, daily, and highly visible shock for anyone interacting with the U.S. economy. You step off the plane, you go to a restaurant, you have a nice meal, the bill comes, and suddenly you are face to face with the invisible tax tipping culture.
Oh, tipping culture. It is the great American cultural institution that completely baffles visitors from around the world. I mean, in places like Japan, South Korea, Australia, or most of Europe, tipping is either a tiny bonus for exceptional service, completely unnecessary, or even an outright insult to the professional pride of the server.
Yeah.
In the United States, it is a deeply embedded, rigidly enforced social obligation. It is not optional.
And as an outsider, or honestly, even as someone who has lived here my whole life, it can just feel like you are being shaken down for extra cash at the end of a meal. But our sources point out there is a structural why behind this, and understanding the systemic reason completely changes the context. It's not just a quirky cultural habit, it's literally built into the legal wage structure of the country.
That's the crucial mechanism to understand right there. In the United States, workers in many service industries, particularly restaurants, are legally allowed to be paid a drastically lower minimum wage than workers in other sectors. The federal tipped minimum wage is $2.13 per hour.
Wait, $2.13. I just want to pause on that because it sounds like a typo from 1991. That barely buys a single pack of gum today. How does a system legally justify paying a human being $2 an hour?
Well, the system fundamentally assumes, by design, that tips from customers will make up the massive difference between that $2.13 and an actual livable income. The restaurant owner is only legally responsible for that tiny fraction, and the customer is expected to directly pay the rest of the worker's labor cost. So when you leave a tip for your server at a sit-down restaurant, you have to completely reframe your thinking. You are not giving them a little bonus for a job well done. You are directly subsidizing the worker's livable income.
Right. You are paying their wages. So if you are listening to this right now and you come from a country with a strong social safety net and high minimum wages, your internal monologue might be saying, I fundamentally disagree with this system. Employers should pay their workers fairly. So I'm going to refuse to tip to make a political statement. What actually happens in that scenario?
Refusing to tip doesn't make a political statement to the restaurant owner at all. And it certainly doesn't change federal labor laws. It just financially starves the server who just spent an hour bringing you food. I mean, they still have to pay rent. In fact, in many restaurants, servers have to tip out the bartender and the busboys based on their total sales. So if you leave zero on a $100 bill, the server might actually have to pay money out of their own pocket just for the privilege of serving you.
Oh, wow. That completely flips the script. But wait, let me push back on this a little bit. Because the $2.13 is the federal minimum. What happens in states where the minimum wage is legally higher for everyone, like California or Washington State, where a server makes a full $15 or $16 state minimum wage before a single tip is even left? Does the tipping expectation drop to reflect that?
That is the most logical question you could ask. You would think the market would adjust, right? But the reality of American money culture is that it doesn't. Regardless of those local state variations, the unwritten national law still applies. The expectation of tipping remains incredibly rigid across the entire country. The cultural habit is so deeply ingrained that 18 to 20% remains the standard no matter what state you are dining in and no matter what the base wage of that specific server is.
So let's walk through the actual math of it, because nobody wants to sit at a table with a calculator trying to figure out how to leave the restaurant. For a sit-down restaurant where someone takes your order, brings the food, checks on your table, the absolute standard is 18 to 20%. And there's a key mechanical detail here, which is that the percentage is based on the pre-tax bill.
Yes, that is a very common point of confusion. You don't calculate the tip on the final total after the government has added the local sales tax. You calculate it solely on the cost of the food and drinks you consumed. 15% is generally considered the absolute minimum for just okay service, 20% is the standard for good service, and 25% is for truly exceptional service.
And there's an incredible mental math shortcut Americans use constantly for this. Let's say your pre-tax bill comes to $80. To find 20% without opening the calculator app on your phone, you just take the total, 80, and move the decimal point one place to the left. That gives you 10%, which is $8. Then you just double that number. 8 doubled is 16, boom. Your tip is $16.
It's a really elegant trick. Move the decimal, double it, and you're done. But tipping absolutely does not stop at restaurants, and this is where the landscape becomes a minefield for anyone trying to budget. The unwritten rules apply to almost every transactional service.
Let's talk about food delivery then. DoorDash, Uber Eats, ordering a pizza. Because this isn't just a reward for driving to your house, the entire system functions on a totally different mechanic than people realize.
Right. For delivery, 15 to 20% of the order total is the expectation, or a minimum of $3 to $5 if you are just ordering like a single sandwich. But the crucial nuance with app-based delivery is that it's not actually a tip in the traditional sense. It is a bid for service.
Wait, a bid for service? Explain how that works on the driver's end.
So when you place an order on one of these apps, the driver's interface pings them with the job. And crucially, they can often see the estimated total payout, which includes your tip, before they even decide to accept the job.
Oh, wow. So if I decide I'll just tip 0 on my credit card and hand the driver a $5 bill when they get to my door, the driver doesn't know that. They are just looking at their phone, seeing a job that pays $2.50 for 30 minutes of driving.
Exactly. And because they are independent contractors, they will simply decline it. Low tip or no tip orders get bounced around the system, repeatedly declined by drivers. The practical result: your food sits on a counter at the restaurant getting cold, waiting for an algorithm to find a driver desperate enough to finally take it. You aren't tipping for past service, you are bidding to get your food delivered at all.
That is fascinating. Okay, what about moving? I had a situation last year where I hired professional movers. It cost over $1,000 for the company. At the end of a grueling day, the guys are standing in my living room, and I suddenly realized I had no idea what the protocol was. Do I calculate 20% of $1,000? That's $200. It felt insane, but I didn't want to be disrespectful.
Yeah, that is exactly the kind of situation that causes massive anxiety. For movers, you do not use the 20% restaurant rule. The standard is a flat rate per worker based on the time. It is typically $20 to $50 per mover for a half-day job. If it's a full-day job and they are hauling heavy boxes of books up 3 flights of stairs in the July heat, $40 to $100 per mover is the standard.
Okay, that makes so much more sense. But what about the digital guilt trips? You know exactly what I'm talking about. You walk into a coffee shop, you order a plain black drip coffee. The cashier taps a few buttons, turns an iPad around to face you, and it's glaring at you with pre-selected options for 15, 20, or 25%. There is no table service. They literally just handed you a paper cup.
The digital tip screen. This is a very recent evolution, and it has caused intense friction even among Americans. In counter service situations, bakeries, coffee shops, takeout windows tipping is genuinely optional. A tip of $1 to $2 on a coffee or maybe 10% on a larger takeout order is very generous, but it's not obligatory in the same way sit-down dining is.
But the psychology of that screen, the social pressure is immense. You feel like a complete villain if you hit the custom tip button, type in a 0, and hit no tip, while the person who just made your coffee is standing 2 feet away looking right at you.
I know, it is entirely designed to leverage social pressure. But you have to differentiate between the mandatory social contract of a waiter making $2 an hour who is actively serving you for an hour, and the suggested tip for a barista making a standard hourly wage who poured a drip coffee. Now, having said that, there are clear boundaries in American culture where you absolutely do not tip. You do not tip at retail clothing stores. You do not tip your doctor, your lawyer, or your accountant.
Right. But if you are in a situation where tipping is the norm, like a sit-down restaurant, and you decide to leave the tip line completely blank on the receipt, or you draw a hard line through it, or you physically write a big fat 0, what does that actually communicate?
It's considered a highly hostile social statement. You aren't just saving $20. You are aggressively, actively telling the server that their service was completely unacceptable to the point of being offensive. Even for poor service, most Americans will still leave 10 to 15% just to cover the server's basic costs. Leaving a 0 can literally provoke a confrontation as you walk out the door. The cultural rule is very clear. If the service was truly that terrible, you ask to speak to a manager to resolve it. You do not financially penalize the server.
Okay, so we've navigated the anxiety of paying the server, but that's only half the battle at a dinner party, because now we have to navigate the awkwardness of paying the friends sitting at the table with you. And our sources point out that how a group splits a bill reveals so much about America's broader social attitudes toward money.
It really does. In many cultures globally, the approach to group dining is collective. When a group goes out, one person treats the whole table. Maybe it's the oldest person or the one who initiated the invitation, and there's a deeply understood, unspoken social contract that someone else in the group will pick up the check next time. It builds social cohesion over time.
But in America, the default mode is fiercely individualistic. We default to what's known as going Dutch. Everyone is responsible for paying for exactly what they themselves consumed.
And there is a whole social calculus to how this is executed. Sometimes a group will do an even split, where you just take the total bill, divide it by 4 people, and everyone pays the exact same amount. It's fast and easy, but it is a breeding ground for silent resentment.
Oh, absolutely. If I ordered a side salad and a glass of tap water, and my friend ordered a prime ribeye steak and 3 expensive craft cocktails, an even split means I am directly subsidizing their luxury meal. I'm paying for their steak.
Which is exactly why the separate checks method exists. You simply tell the server before you even order your food, "We'd like separate checks, please." Servers in America are completely used to this request. Their point-of-sale systems are designed to handle it easily. But the most modern approach, the one that defines almost all current social gatherings for anyone under the age of 50, is the Venmo method.
Ah, the Venmo method. This is where one person at the table says, "Hey, I'll just put the whole thing on my card." Now, they usually do this because they want to harvest all the credit card rewards points for a $500 dinner. But then everyone else at the table immediately transfers them their exact mathematical share using a peer-to-peer app like Venmo, Zelle, or Cash App.
And there is a strict, unyielding protocol here. If your friend puts their card down and they request the money on Venmo, you pay it immediately, right there at the table before you stand up, or the exact moment you get into your car to go home. Delayed repayment is highly inconsiderate. It damages friendships.
Correct.
You do not want to become known as the person that people have to constantly hunt down via text message for $25.
Right. And a pro tip for you listening, do not forget to factor the tip and tax into your math when you send the money. If the total bill is $100, split evenly 4 ways, and the tip is $20, you do not owe $25, you owe $30.
It sounds minor, but shortchanging the person who paid the bill because you forgot about the tax is a major social faux pas.
Okay, so we're at dinner, we've venomed our friends, the math is settled, and we're just talking. But there is one topic you cannot bring up, the great salary taboo. If I lean over to my friend who just got a big promotion and say, "Hey, congratulations, how much do you make at the new job?" What happens to the vibe at that table?
The air completely leaves the room. It gets dead silent. In mainstream American culture, asking someone directly about their salary is considered just as invasive, just as inappropriate as asking them about their weight, their medical history, or their sexual history. It is a massive social landmine.
But why? Because in many parts of Eastern Europe, the Middle East, or Asia, asking someone's salary is just normal, practical conversation. It's like asking what neighborhood they live in or what kind of car they drive. It's just a data point. Why is it so incredibly radioactive here?
It goes back to the very foundation of the American myth of meritocracy. There is a deeply held, almost religious cultural narrative that your financial net worth is perfectly tied to your personal value and your hard work. If you are successful and wealthy, the culture says you earned it through grit and intelligence. Therefore, if you are struggling financially, the dark inverse of that myth is that it must be your own fault. It must be a lack of discipline or a moral failure.
Right, it completely ignores systemic inequality, generational wealth, or pure luck.
Exactly. So discussing salaries openly disrupts that narrative. It exposes the inequalities. It invites immediate judgment. If you make less than your friends, you feel intense shame. If you make significantly more, you feel guilt, or you worry they will expect you to pay for everything. So the culture just agreed to never, ever talk about it.
But the secrecy is terrible for the worker. If you are a newcomer to the country or just entering a new industry, you need to know what people make so you know how to negotiate your own salary. If no one talked about it, the employer holds all the power and you end up massively underpaid.
It is evolving, slowly. Pay transparency is beginning to erode the taboo. We have websites like Glassdoor, Levels.fi, and PayScale where anonymous salary data is freely available. More importantly, we are seeing legislative changes. States like Colorado, New York, California, and Washington have actually passed laws requiring employers to list the salary ranges directly on the job postings. So the systemic secrecy is breaking down.
Which is great for browsing jobs online, but it doesn't solve the immediate social problem if I'm sitting with someone in my industry and I genuinely need to know what a realistic salary is. How do I get that information without stepping on the landmine? I love the actionable script provided in the notes for this. It is a brilliant psychological bypass.
Yes, the phrasing is everything. Instead of asking, how much do you make? Which feels like a personal attack, you frame it as abstract market research. You say something like, I'm currently trying to understand the market rate for this type of role as I look at my next career steps. Do you have any insight into what's a typical range in our industry right now?
It's perfect. You take the spotlight completely off the individual and put it on the market. They can answer by saying, well, a typical range for a senior manager is between 90 and 110,000, without ever having to confess their own exact paycheck. You get the data you need, and nobody's meritocracy ego gets bruised.
And this intense cultural secrecy around money extends directly to how Americans view debt.
Oh, this is fascinating. The bizarre cultural contradiction of good debt versus bad debt.
Yeah, in America, debt is heavily moralized. Good debt is seen as an investment in your future earning potential or stability. A mortgage to buy a house is good debt. Student loans to get a university degree are good debt. Culturally, people will sit at a dinner party, drink wine, and openly, casually complain about the fact that they have $80,000 in student loan debt. It is socially acceptable. It signals that you are educated and trying to better yourself.
But let me challenge that. Is a $600,000 mortgage at a 7% interest rate really good just because it's attached to a house? It's still a massive financial liability hanging over your head for 30 years.
Mathematically, you can absolutely argue that. But culturally, the mortgage is viewed as an asset-building tool, regardless of the interest rate. But contrast that with bad debt. Bad debt is borrowing for consumption. Credit cards. Auto loans for luxury cars you can't afford.
And nobody talks about that. You could have someone happily discussing their $500,000 mortgage, but they will take the secret of their $8,000 credit card debt to their grave. The shame associated with credit card debt is immense.
It's immense, yet statistically it is incredibly common. The average American household carries between $7,000 and $10,000 in revolving credit card balances from month to month. Millions of people are quietly drowning in 25% interest rates, but because of the meritocracy myth, they suffer in total silence.
So to participate in this Venmo culture, to pay the rent, to manage this debt, you have to be plugged into the actual plumbing of American finance, the banking system. And if you are coming from almost anywhere else in the developed world, the U.S. banking system is a massive paradox. It relies heavily on high-tech biometric apps, but at its absolute core, it is still fundamentally tethered to physical pieces of paper.
The paper check paradox. If you come from Europe or many parts of Asia, a paper check belongs in a museum next to the fax machine. It is completely obsolete. But in the United States, you still absolutely need to know how to write one.
It's wild. I literally had to write one last week for a security deposit on an apartment. The landlord wouldn't accept anything else.
Exactly. Landlords often demand physical checks for rent. Government agencies will frequently send tax refunds via check in the mail. Plumbers, electricians, or independent contractors often prefer checks because they don't want to pay credit card processing fees. You have to know the physical anatomy of it, the date in the top right, the pay line, writing the numerical amount in the small box, and then spelling out the written amount in cursive letters on the line below it so it can't be altered, the memo line, and the signature. It is a legacy analog system that simply refuses to die.
And why hasn't it died? Because the U.S. banking infrastructure fundamentally lacks a unified, real-time, bank-to-bank transfer system. I mean, in Europe, they have SEPA. In India, they have the UPI system. You can instantly transfer money from your bank to a street vendor's bank instantly for free in 3 seconds. In the U.S., traditional bank transfers, called ACH transfers, are processed in batches and can take 1 to 3 full business days to clear.
Which is precisely why third-party tech companies like Zelle, Cash App, and Venmo exploded. The banks were too slow, so tech companies built a real-time, instantaneous layer on top of the slow banking system.
But before you can Venmo anyone, you need the actual bank account, and the American banking system is loaded with booby traps designed to penalize you for not having enough money.
The fee trap. There are monthly maintenance fees, usually $5 to $15 a month, just for the privilege of keeping the account open. Though you can usually get those waived if you set up direct deposit, meaning your employer sends your paycheck directly into the account. But the real structural danger that traps millions of people is the overdraft fee.
Let's look at the mechanics of the overdraft fee, because it is not just a simple penalty, it is engineered. Let's say you have $20 left in your checking account. You lose track of your balance, and you go buy $5 coffee with your debit card. The bank, in its generosity, will approve the transaction so you aren't embarrassed at the counter. But then they hit you with a $35 penalty for spending money you didn't have. Your $5 coffee just costs you $40.
And here's where the mechanics become truly predatory. Let's say you had that $20. Over the course of the day, you buy the $5 coffee, you buy a $10 sandwich, and then you pay a $50 electric bill. Historically, banks would not process those transactions in chronological order at the end of the day. They would intentionally reorder them, processing the largest transaction, the $50 electric bill, first.
Wait, why would they process the biggest one first?
Because processing the $50 bill against your $20 balance immediately drains your account into the negative, which means the $10 sandwich that follows triggers a $35 overdraft fee. And the $5 coffee that follows that triggers a second $35 overdraft fee. By reordering them, they maximize the number of penalties they can hit you with.
Oh, wow. That's mathematically engineered to extract maximum fees from the people who have the least amount of money.
Precisely. It is a massive profit center for retail banks, generating billions of dollars a year. So, the counterintuitive but absolutely critical advice is to explicitly call your bank and opt out of overdraft protection.
Right. If you opt out and you try to buy that coffee with only $2 in your account, the bank doesn't protect you by spotting you the money. The card simply declines, the machine beeps, the cashier says decline, and you walk away mildly embarrassed. But you walk away without a $35 penalty. It is a necessary financial guardrail.
Speaking of debit cards, this leads us directly into the great American divide, debit versus credit.
Yes. When I travel abroad, I notice a lot of people just use debit cards for everything. It feels safe. It's money you actually have in your account. But in America, credit cards dominate everything. Why?
We need to define the fundamental structural difference first. A debit card pulls money directly out of your checking account in real time. A credit card is a short-term, unsecured loan. When you buy groceries with a credit card, the bank pays the grocery store on your behalf. You now owe the bank. You have a grace period, usually 25 to 30 days, to pay the bank back. If you pay the full balance on time, you pay 0% interest.
Okay, but if you don't pay it back on time, the interest rates are 20 to 30% APR. It's incredibly dangerous. So I have to ask, if credit cards carry the risk of these massive life-ruining debt spirals, why do people say credit cards are better? Why play with fire when you could just use a debit card and only spend what you have?
Because and this is a massive, highly disciplined, if you use them responsibly and pay the balance in full every single month, credit cards are objectively superior financial tools in the American system. There are 4 main structural reasons. First, rewards. Credit cards give you 1 to 5% cash back or travel points on every purchase. If you use it for all your normal expenses, it's effectively a 1 to 5% discount on your entire life. You do not get that with debit.
Okay, the rewards are nice, but what about safety?
That is the second and most important reason: fraud protection. Let's look at the actual mechanism of liability. If someone steals your debit card number and buys a $2,000 laptop online, that $2,000 is instantly gone from your actual checking account. Your rent check might bounce. You can't buy groceries while you wait weeks for the bank to investigate and maybe refund your actual cash.
That is terrifying because your actual liquidity is just frozen.
Exactly. But if someone steals your credit card and buys that same laptop, your actual bank account is completely untouched. The thief stole the bank's money. You just open the app, click Report Fraud. Your personal liability is legally capped, usually at $0, and the credit card company's massive legal and security apparatus deals with it. You just go about your day.
So a credit card is essentially a financial blast shield between the chaotic internet and your actual cash.
Exactly. Third, purchase protections. Credit cards often offer extended warranties, travel insurance for delayed flights, or rental car collision insurance built in for free. And fourth, the most critical reason of all, using a debit card does absolutely nothing to build your credit history. Using a credit card is the primary, most effective way to build your credit score.
Which is the perfect bridge to the core of the system. You cannot get those superior credit card benefits or rent an apartment or buy a car without a good credit score. It is the center of the American financial universe. I like to think of it as an adult GPA.
That is a very apt metaphor. It is your permanent, highly visible financial reputation. Specifically, we are usually talking about the FICO score, which is a mathematical algorithm that grades your trustworthiness. The scale ranges from 300 to 850.
Let's give you the scale so you know where you stand. 800 and above is exceptional. You get the best rates on everything. 670 to 739 is considered good. You'll be fine. Anything under 579 is poor, and life gets very expensive and difficult. But what does this number actually control? Why does everyone obsess over it?
It controls access to basic modern life. It dictates whether a landlord will approve your application for an apartment rental or if they will demand 6 months of rent up front because you look risky. It determines if you can get a cell phone contract without paying a massive security deposit. It dictates the exact interest rate you'll pay on a car loan or a 30-year mortgage, which can mean the difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. Some auto insurance companies use it to set your monthly premiums. Even some employers, especially in finance, defense, or government sectors, will pull your credit history before offering you a job.
If it's an adult GPA, you can't just walk into the classroom on the last day, ace the final exam, and prove you're smart. The algorithm doesn't care how much money you have in the bank right now. It wants to see years of you turning in your homework on time. Every single monthly payment you make is a homework assignment. And if you skip class and miss a payment, it leaves a permanent mark on your transcript.
And this creates a deeply frustrating, cruel paradox for newcomers to America. When you arrive, even if you have $1 million in cash, you have ghost profile. You have zero credit history in the U.S. system. And to the FICO algorithm, having no credit is viewed almost as suspiciously as having poor credit. Lenders have no historical data to judge your behavioral trustworthiness.
But wait. To build credit, you need a credit card. To get a credit card, the bank checks your credit score. If you don't have a score, they deny you the card. How on earth do you break that infinite loop?
It requires a very specific blueprint for beginners. Step 1, get your identifier in the system. You need a social security number, an SSN. If you are on a work visa, you will get this. If you are an international student without work authorization, you need to apply for an ITIN, an individual taxpayer identification number. This is the unique tag the credit bureaus use to track your behavior.
Okay, so step 2 is getting the right kind of plastic. A regular bank will reject a newcomer for a standard rewards credit card. So you have to get what is called a secured credit card. This is a brilliant mechanism.
It really is. With a secured card, you give the bank a cash deposit of, say, $300. They hold that cash in a locked account. In return, they issue you a credit card with a $300 limit. It is mathematically impossible for the bank to lose money on you because if you vanish and never pay your bill, they just keep your $300. But as you use the card and pay it off every month, they report that positive behavior to the credit bureaus. After a year of good behavior, you graduate to a real, unsecured card, and they hand your $300 deposit back.
Another powerful hack is becoming an authorized user. This is where you ride someone else's coattails. If you have a highly trusted family member or spouse who has a long-standing credit card with a perfect payment history, they can add your name to their account as an authorized user. You don't even need to possess the physical plastic card. Just having your name linked to their positive, decade-long history mathematically injects points into your new, empty profile.
Okay, so you have the card, you are in the game. What are the mechanical rules to actually build a high score? There are 5 non-negotiable rules. Rule 1, pay your bill in full every single month. Do not carry a balance.
I want to highlight this because there is a persistent, terrible myth that carrying a small balance and paying a little bit of interest helps your score. People think it shows you are using the credit.
That is entirely false. Paying interest does not build your credit score. It just makes the banking executives rich. Pay the statement balance to absolute zero every single month.
Rule 2, keep your credit utilization low. Let's really dive into the mechanics of this because it trips people up. What is utilization?
Credit utilization is the math equation of how much credit you have available versus how much you are actively using at any given moment. If your secured card has a $1,000 limit and you spend $900 on it this month, your utilization is 90%. Now, you might plan to pay that $900 off in full on Friday, but if the credit card company reports your balance to the bureaus on Thursday, the algorithm sees a 90% utilization. To a computer model, maxing out your available credit makes you look desperate for cash. You look like a high risk of defaulting.
So what is the safe zone?
You must keep your utilization under 30% of your total limit, and ideally under 10%. So on a $1,000 limit, you should never let the balance go above $100 to $300 before paying it down. If you need to spend more, just pay the card off multiple times a week to keep the balance artificially low before the statement closes.
Rule 3, never miss a payment. Payment history accounts for 35% of your total mathematical score. A single payment that is 30 days late can drop your score by 50 to 100 points instantly, and it stays on your record for 7 long years. Put everything on autopay.
Rule 4, limit your hard inquiries. Every time you formally apply for a new line of credit, a new card, a car loan, the lender pulls your official report. This is called a hard inquiry, and it temporarily dings your score by a few points. If you apply for 5 different credit cards in one weekend because you want the sign-up bonuses, the FICO algorithm assumes you are in sudden financial distress and drops your score significantly to warn other lenders.
And Rule 5 is simply be patient. You cannot speedrun a credit score. It takes a solid 1 to 2 years of turning in that homework on time to build a robust, good score.
And we should briefly mention who is actually grading all this homework: the watchdogs. The 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion.
Which are not government agencies, right? That's a huge misconception.
Correct. They are massive, private, for-profit data brokerage companies collecting and selling your financial behavior. But you are legally entitled to see exactly what data they have on you. You can get 1 free comprehensive report a year from annualcreditreport.com.
And it is crucial to distinguish here, the report is the raw data. The long list of every account, every inquiry, every address you've lived at. The score is the math grade calculated from that raw data. You must monitor your report for identity theft. If you see a car loan in Texas that you didn't open, you have to actively dispute it to get it removed.
Okay, so you've navigated the credit system, you are paying your bills on time. But none of that matters if you don't understand how the money actually gets into your checking account to pay those bills. Let's talk about the shock of the American paycheck.
Oh, this is where expectations collide brutally with reality. It is sticker shock in reverse. Imagine you sit down at the negotiation table, you do a great interview, and you land a job paying $70,000 a year. You go home, you open your calculator app. Okay, $70,000 divided by 12 months. I'm going to have over $5,800 a month hitting my bank account. I can afford this apartment. I can buy this car. I'm rich.
And then the first payday actually arrives. You open your banking app. And instead of $5,800, the deposit is maybe $3,900. And the newcomer immediately panics, thinking the accounting department made a massive typographical error.
But it's no error. It is the gauntlet of American payroll deductions. The massive gulf between gross income, the sticker price of your salary, and net income, which is the actual spendable liquidity that lands in your pocket.
Let's run you through the gauntlet mechanically. First, federal income tax. The U.S. uses a progressive tax system.
Can we pause on the progressive tax system? Because there is a deeply persistent myth I hear constantly. People saying, I don't want to accept this raise or work overtime because it will bump me into a higher tax bracket and I'll end up taking home less money than I did before.
I am so glad you brought that up because it represents a fundamental mathematical misunderstanding of marginal tax rates. Think of the tax brackets not as a flat percentage applied to your whole income, but as a series of physical buckets. Let's say the first bucket holds your first $11,000 of income. The government taxes that specific bucket at 10%. Once that bucket is full, your income spills over into the second bucket, which holds income from $11,000 up to about $44,000. The government taxes only the money inside that second bucket at 12%.
So if I make $45,000 and I move into the 22% tax bracket, they don't go back and tax my entire $45,000 at 22%.
Absolutely not. Only the tiny amount of money that's spilled over into that third bucket gets taxed at the higher rate. The money in the lower buckets remains taxed at the lower rates. Earning more money will never result in you taking home less net pay. It mathematically cannot happen.
That is such an important clarification. Okay, so after the federal tax buckets take their share, we move to state income tax.
And this varies wildly by geography. If you live in California or New York, you might lose up to 10 to 13% of your paycheck to the state government. If you live in Texas, Florida, Nevada, or Washington, state income tax is literally 0%.
Then we have FICA, which stands for the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, better known as Social Security. They take a flat 6.2% of your gross income up to a certain cap to fund the national retirement system. Then Medicare tax, another 1.45% taken right off the top to fund healthcare for seniors.
And we aren't done. Unlike countries with nationalized healthcare, if you want health insurance through your employer, your portion of the monthly premium is deducted directly from your paycheck. If you elect dental or vision insurance, that's deducted too.
When you add all of these up taxes, Social Security, healthcare, the total drain is easily 25 to 35% of your gross pay. Your $70,000 salary visually transforms into $45,000 to $52,000 of actual spendable money.
However, there is one voluntary deduction that you will see on your onboarding paperwork that is absolutely critical to understand. It is arguably the most important piece of financial advice in the entire American system, the 401k match.
Let's break the mechanics of this down. A 401k is an employer-sponsored retirement investment account. You tell your HR department, take a percentage of my paycheck and put it directly into this investment account. And the beauty of a traditional 401k is that it is pre-tax money.
Right. It actually lowers your taxable income today. If you make $70,000 and put $5,000 into a traditional 401k, the government only taxes you as if you made $65,000. You defer paying the taxes until you are 65 years old and withdrawing the money.
Or you can choose the Roth 401k option, which is the exact inverse. You pay the taxes now on your current paycheck, but all the compound growth over the next 40 years and all the withdrawals in retirement are completely tax-free forever. But the real magic, the reason you absolutely must do this, is the employer match.
Many American companies will match your contribution up to a certain percentage of your salary as a job perk. Let's say your company offers a 4% match. If you put 4% of your salary into the account, the company will deposit an equal amount into your account out of their own pocket.
It is literally free money. It is 100% guaranteed return on investment the exact second you make it. If you make $70,000 and you put in $2,800 over the year, the company just hands you another $2,800. If you do not contribute enough to get that full match, you are effectively refusing part of your own compensation package. It's like your boss trying to hand you a check for $3,000 and you saying, "No thanks, keep it." You must contribute up to the match.
It is non-negotiable. So the paycheck is smaller, but you are automatically building long-term wealth. But we have to talk about how those taxes are actually finalized every year, because the American DIY tax system is uniquely convoluted. In most developed countries, the government knows what you made, they do the math, and they just send you a bill or a refund check.
Right. The IRS already has my W-2 form from my employer. They know exactly what I made down to the penny. Why do I have to guess? And if I guess wrong, they penalize me.
Well, it's because the system relies heavily on self-reporting deductions. Maybe you had a baby, maybe you bought an electric car, maybe you gave money to charity. The IRS doesn't know those things. But a major reason it remains so incredibly difficult is intense corporate lobbying. The companies that make tax preparation software have spent millions of dollars lobbying Congress to prevent the IRS from creating a simple, automated filing system because it would destroy their business model.
So every year, by April 15th, you have to reconcile the books. You take the estimates that were withheld from your paycheck all year, and you compare them against your final actual tax liability based on the complex tax code.
Exactly. And a vital note for our international listeners. If you are a non-resident alien on a temporary visa, like an F1 student or an H-1B worker in your first years, you cannot use the standard easy tax software. You have to file a highly specific form called the 1040-NR. Because international tax treaties are incredibly complex and getting it wrong can cause visa issues, this is the one time you absolutely should spend the money to hire a professional tax preparer.
And if you go through all this math and you end up getting a massive $3,000 refund check in April, a lot of people celebrate. They go buy a TV. But a refund isn't a bonus from the government?
No, it's terrible financial management. A large refund simply means you had way too much money withheld from every single paycheck all year long. You essentially gave the U.S. government an interest-free loan of your own money for 12 months. Money that could have been sitting in your own savings account earning interest or paying down your credit card debt. Your goal should be to break even on tax day.
Okay, so you have survived tax season. You finally know exactly what your true net income is. Let's look at how fast the American landscape drains that money away through invisible, mandatory infrastructure costs. I call this the leaky bucket.
Financial planners often use the 50-30-20 rule for budgeting. You aim to allocate 50% of your net income to mandatory needs, housing, food, transportation. 30% goes to wants, entertainment, dining out, vacations, and 20% goes to savings and aggressive debt repayment.
It sounds so clean and easy on a spreadsheet. But the reality of American consumer culture is like a leaky bucket. You might be incredibly disciplined about the big, obvious holes in the bucket. You negotiate a decent rent, you don't buy designer clothes, but the bucket drains completely dry anyway because there are 100 tiny hidden pinholes constantly leaking water. Let's do the math live. Let's say your net income, the money that actually hits your bank account, is $5,000 a month.
Okay, $5,000. Let's start with the biggest need outside of housing, car ownership. Unless you live in a dense, highly connected urban core like New York City, Chicago, or Boston, public transit is severely lacking. A car isn't a luxury. It is mandatory for basic survival to get to work, to get groceries.
And the cost is staggering. People look at a $350 monthly car payment and think, I can afford $350 out of my $5,000. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. Subtract the $350, we are at $4,650.
Now add the mandatory auto insurance, which is legally required to drive. Depending on your age and credit score, that's $150 to $200 a month. Subtract that.
Down to $44.50, gas. If you have a normal commute, that's easily $200 a month, down to $42.50.
Annual registration fees to the state, parking fees, oil changes, replacing worn-out tires. When you amortize all of that, owning a reliable car in America actually costs between $10,000 and $12,000 a year. That is $1,000 a month just for the privilege of moving your physical body from your house to your office.
Wow, so our $5,000 is suddenly down to $4,000, and we haven't even paid rent or eaten a single calorie yet. Then there is healthcare out-of-pocket costs. Even if you have good insurance through your employer, you still have deductibles. You pay a $50 copay just to walk into the doctor's office. You pay for prescriptions. The average is $150 a month of your own money on top of premiums. We're at $38.50.
And then we have connectivity and what we call subscription creep.
Oh, this is a massive pinhole in the bucket. A major unlimited cell phone plan from AT&T or Verizon is easily $80 a month for one person, down to $37.70.
Though there is a mechanical workaround here, using an MVNO, a mobile virtual network operator like Mint Mobile or Google Fi. They lease the exact same cellular towers from the big companies, but charge $15 to $40 a month because they don't have physical retail stores.
But then you absolutely need home internet for $70, down to $3,700. And then the subscriptions. Netflix, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Hulu, iCloud storage, maybe a digital newspaper. Because they auto-renew invisibly on your credit card every month, you don't feel the psychological pain of handing over cash. This subscription creep easily drains $150 a month, down to $35.50.
We also have to factor in everyday survival costs that catch newcomers off guard. Groceries are incredibly expensive right now. $400 a month for a single person is standard, and the prices on the shelves are an illusion.
Yes, the sales tax illusion. If you go to a supermarket in Europe, the value-added tax, the VAT, is baked into the sticker price. If a shirt says 20 euros, you hand the cashier a 20 euro note and walk out. In America, if an item says $10 on the shelf, you get to the register and the cashier asks for $10.80.
Because sales tax is added at the exact point of sale. And it is maddeningly inconsistent because it varies not just by the state you are in, but by the specific county and even the city. One town might have a 7% sales tax, and the town 5 miles down the road has an 8.5% sales tax. It makes exact mental budgeting almost impossible.
Another hidden cost depending entirely on your geography: winter clothing. If you move from India or Brazil to Minnesota or Michigan, winter gear is not a cute fashion choice. It is literal survival gear. A proper sub-zero winter coat, insulated waterproof boots, thermal layers, this will cost $400 to $500 up front just so you can walk to your car in January without getting frostbite.
Even doing laundry is a hidden cost. If your apartment doesn't have a washer and dryer inside the unit, which is extremely common in older cities, you are carrying your clothes to a laundromat or a basement laundry room, feeding quarters, or swiping a card. That's $50 a month just to have clean clothes.
So our $5,000 net income is suddenly hovering around $3,000. And we haven't paid for the absolute biggest expense in that 50% needs category, the roof over your head.
Which brings us to the great debate: renting versus homeownership.
The golden rule of thumb we mentioned earlier is that your total housing costs shouldn't exceed 30% of your gross income. But if you are moving to a major economic hub, San Francisco, New York, Seattle, Austin, that rule is practically laughable. It is mathematically impossible for most entry-level workers.
Let's talk about the brutal realities of renting first. The upfront liquidity required just to get the keys to an apartment is astronomical. It's not just paying the first month's rent.
No, the initial cash requirement is a major hurdle. Let's look at the mechanics of a lease signing. Landlords typically require a security deposit equal to 1 full month's rent to protect themselves against damage. Furthermore, they often require the first month's rent and the last month's rent paid in advance to protect against you breaking the lease.
So if you find a relatively modest apartment for $1,500 a month on move-in day, before you even move a single box in, you have to write a certified bank check for $4,500 just to walk through the door.
Plus non-refundable application fees of $50 just for them to run the FICO credit score check we talked about earlier. And if you are in hyper-competitive, deeply weird rental markets like New York City or Boston, you often have to pay a broker fee.
The broker fee is a uniquely painful mechanism. It is a fee paid to the real estate agent who unlocked the door and showed you the apartment. Even if you found the apartment yourself online, you have to pay the landlord's broker. And it can be anywhere from 1 month's rent up to 15% of the entire annual rent. That is thousands of dollars in cash that vanishes, providing zero ongoing value to you.
It's excruciating, and once you're actually living there, you absolutely need renter's insurance. It covers your personal belongings if there's a fire or a break-in, but more importantly, it provides liability coverage if your bathtub overflows and ruins the apartment below yours. The good news is it's very cheap, usually $15 to $30 a month. But a hidden trap is utilities. You have to ask the landlord before signing which utilities are explicitly included in the rent. Because if you are on the hook for water, trash collection, gas heating, and electric, your $1,500 apartment just secretly became an $1,800 apartment.
Now, because renting feels like a constant drain of cash with no return on investment, the cultural narrative strongly, aggressively pushes people toward the American dream of homeownership.
Oh, the pressure is everywhere. You constantly hear relatives or financial gurus saying, renting is just throwing money away. You're just paying your landlord's mortgage. Buy a house as soon as possible. Is buying always mathematically better?
It is a pervasive myth, but mathematically it is often false. We need to look at the hidden mechanics and costs of buying because it is not a magic wealth-building bullet for everyone in every situation.
Right. Let's look at the barriers. Traditionally, you are told you need a 20% down payment to buy a house. If you are buying a modest $350,000 house, that's $70,000 in raw cash you need saved up, not invested, just sitting in a bank.
But wait. I see ads all the time for programs that let you buy a house with way less down. Yes, there are FHA loans backed by the federal government that allow down payments as low as 3.5%. So on that $350,000 house, you only need about $12,000 down. It sounds incredibly accessible. But here is the mechanical trap. If you put down less than 20%, the bank looks at your loan-to-value ratio and sees you as a higher risk. So they legally force you to pay PMI or private mortgage insurance.
Okay, what does that insure? Does it protect me if I lose my job and can't pay the mortgage?
No. That is the great irony. It explicitly insures the lender. If you lose your job and default on the loan, the PMI policy pays the bank to cover their losses, but you are the one forced to pay the monthly premium for it. It can easily add $150 to $300 to your monthly mortgage payment, yielding absolutely zero financial benefit or protection to you. It is purely a penalty fee for not having enough cash up front.
That is wild. And the interest rates themselves dictate everything. On a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, the way amortization works, you pay mostly interest for the first 10 years. A tiny shift in your rate, which again is entirely dictated by your FICO credit score, changes the math drastically. If you borrow $300,000, a 1% difference in your interest rate equals roughly $72,000 in extra interest paid over 30 years. One single percentage point is a luxury car's worth of money.
And we haven't even talked about closing costs. Fees for mandatory property appraisals, structural inspections, real estate lawyers, title searches. That's another 2 to 5% of the total purchase price due in cash on closing day.
And once you finally own the deed, the hitting costs absolutely explode. Property taxes are reassessed and can be thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars a year, and they never go away even after the mortgage is paid off. HOA fees, homeowners association fees, can add hundreds a month just to maintain the neighborhood pool. And the biggest unknown is maintenance. When the roof leaks or the furnace dies in February, you can't call a landlord to fix it for free. You call a contractor and write a $10,000 check.
Financial planners estimate that the true unrecoverable cost of owning a home is 30 to 50% more than the monthly principal and interest payment alone.
So going back to the myth, in many high-cost cities, or if you plan to move within 5 years, renting is actually the smarter financial choice. Renting caps your housing liability. Your rent is the maximum you will pay for housing that month. A mortgage is the minimum you will pay, before taxes and broken water heaters. Renting offers flexibility, geographic mobility, and frees up your cash flow so you can invest it elsewhere.
And speaking of protecting yourself from massive unexpected bills, like broken water heaters or medical emergencies, we need to briefly touch on why Americans are so heavily, deeply insured. We mention auto and renter's insurance, but the ecosystem goes much deeper.
It's a culture obsessed with mitigating risk, because as we've discussed, the social safety net in the U.S. is incredibly thin. If you fall, there is very little to catch you. You have to build your own personal safety net through insurance.
Exactly. There is life insurance, specifically term life insurance, which is relatively cheap and protects your family's income stream if you pass away unexpectedly during your earning years. There's disability insurance, which is arguably even more important because it protects your ability to earn an income if you get sick or injured and physically cannot work.
And then umbrella insurance, which provides massive liability protection, like $1 million of coverage. If you get sued for a car accident that exceeds your normal auto policy, it protects your future earnings from being garnished.
So if you can navigate this incredibly complex matrix, if you can manage the tax brackets, avoid the overdraft fees, perfectly engineer your credit score, dodge the subscription creep, and keep a roof over your head without drowning in PMI, how do Americans actually get ahead?
Right. How do you actually build wealth? And what does the immense crushing pressure of all this do to a person's mental health? Let's tackle the wealth building first, because the mechanical blueprint is actually much simpler than Wall Street stockbrokers want you to believe. Investing 101.
The financial industry wants you to think investing requires constantly reading charts and day trading stocks. But the historically proven blueprint is remarkably boring. Step 1, start early to maximize time. Step 2, diversify broadly. Step 3, buy and hold. Do not try to time the market's ups and downs.
Historically, the U.S. stock market returns an average of 7 to 10% a year over long, multi-decade periods. You capture that growth by keeping your costs as low as possible, and you do that by buying index funds.
Let's explain what an index fund is mechanically. Instead of trying to pick one winning company like Apple or Ford and risking everything if they fail, an index fund allows you to buy a tiny microscopic slice of every single major company in the entire stock market simultaneously. You own a piece of the entire U.S. economy. It automatically diversifies your risk, and because it is run by an algorithm rather than an expensive Wall Street manager, the fees are practically zero.
And the specific account you use to buy these index funds is crucial. Aside from the 401k we discussed earlier, you open a personal account called a Roth IRA, an individual retirement account. In 2024, the government allows you to put up to $7,000 a year of your already taxed money into this account. You log on to a low-cost brokerage firm like Vanguard, Fidelity, or Schwab. You link your checking account, you buy a total stock market index fund, and then, the most important step, you automate it.
Automation removes human psychology from the equation. It's a mechanical strategy called dollar-cost averaging. You set up the system to automatically pull, say, $500 from your checking account on the first of every month and invest it. You do this whether the stock market is hitting record all-time highs or whether it is crashing during a recession. You ignore the news.
I love the analogy of building wealth being exactly like planting an oak tree. You cannot yell at a tree to grow faster. You cannot pull on the branches to stretch it. All you can do is systematically water it every single week. That's the dollar cost averaging. And let time and compound interest do the heavy exponential lifting.
And the mathematical reality of compound interest is staggering. It is interest earning interest on itself. Let's look at the numbers. If you invest just $200 a month into an index fund starting at age 25 and never increase that amount, by the time you retire at age 65, you will have contributed $96,000 of your own money. But because of the compounding 8% average return, your account balance will be over $600,000.
Over $500,000 generated purely by time and patience. It's incredible. But we cannot talk about wealth in America without addressing the brutal psychological reality of living inside this system, the American money psychology.
The pressure is immense. The American dream is an undeniably beautiful, motivating concept. The idea that anyone from any background can achieve prosperity purely through hard work and ingenuity. It drives incredible innovation. But the dark side of that intense meritocracy narrative is that it creates profound, isolating shame around any form of financial struggle.
Exactly. If the cultural narrative constantly tells you that success is purely a result of your own hard work and virtue, then the inverse must also be true. If you are struggling to pay your rent, it must be a moral failure. It must be a lack of discipline.
It completely ignores systemic realities. It ignores medical bankruptcies caused by unexpected illnesses. It ignores wage stagnation relative to housing costs. It places the entire burden of success or failure squarely on the shoulders of the isolated individual.
Which leads directly to terrible mental health outcomes. People hide their struggles from their friends, which brings us back to the Venmo dinners and the salary taboos, and it drives a phenomenon called lifestyle inflation.
Lifestyle inflation is a trap. As people advance in their careers and make more money, instead of saving the difference, they immediately expand their spending to project an image of success. They get a raise, so they lease a luxury car. They buy a bigger house they don't really need.
And social media has poured high-octane gasoline on this fire. The constant, relentless social comparison creates a pervasive illusion of wealth. You open Instagram and you see your peers taking luxury vacations to Europe, driving new cars, eating at expensive restaurants. You look at your own budget and you feel completely behind. You feel like a failure.
But you are comparing your messy, behind-the-scenes financial reality to their highly curated highlight reel. What the picture doesn't show is the mechanical reality behind it. Many of those people projecting a life of luxury are actively drowning in that high-interest bad debt we talked about. They're financing their lifestyle at 25% APR on credit cards. There is a massive fundamental difference in America between looking rich and actually being wealthy. Being wealthy is quiet. It is money sitting in an index fund. Looking rich is loud, and it is usually financed by debt.
It's no wonder the financial stress is consistently cited as one of the leading causes of clinical anxiety and marital divorce in the country. So if you are listening to this and the sheer mechanical weight of FICO scores, progressive tax buckets, and PMI feels overwhelming, how do you take back control?
You start by giving yourself grace. Understand that financial literacy is not an innate talent. It is a highly specific, learned mechanical skill. You are not born knowing how an overdraft algorithm works or how to allocate a Roth IRA. You have to learn it, just like learning a new language. Use free resources. Local public libraries frequently host free financial literacy workshops. Nonprofit organizations like the National Foundation for Credit Counseling offer free guidance without trying to sell you a product.
Take it one step at a time. Do not try to fix everything in one weekend. Take one positive action a week. This week, pull your free credit report. Next week, log into your HR portal and check your 401k match. Water the tree slowly. We have covered an unbelievable amount of ground today, from the mechanics of the $2 tipped minimum wage to the reordering of bank overdraft fees, all the way to compound interest in a Roth IRA.
But the core message, the ultimate takeaway, is this money in America is simply a tool. It is a highly specific, fiercely individualistic, rule-bound tool. It is not a measure of your intrinsic worth as a human being, and it should never be a source of shame. Mastering these unwritten rules transforms constant financial anxiety into active empowerment. Once you set the matrix, once you understand why the rules exist, you can navigate it.
You move from being a passive participant who gets blindsided by a $35 overdraft fee for a cup of coffee to an active player who utilizes credit card fraud protections and employer matches to build a highly stable, secure life. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We have spent this entire deep dive mapping out the rigid, highly localized rules of American money. The absolute necessity of the FICO score to rent an apartment, the stubborn reliance on physical paper checks, the deeply complex localized tax codes, but the world is undergoing a massive structural shift. As remote work grows exponentially and digital nomadism becomes a genuinely viable lifestyle for millions of people, what happens to this deeply individualized, geographically locked, credit-dependent culture? If you can earn a U.S. salary in dollars but live in a cash-based society abroad, or a country with a robust socialized safety net and universal healthcare, does the almighty American FICO score start to lose its absolute power? Does the American money culture eventually have to adapt and integrate into a more seamless globalized workforce, or will the U.S. remain an isolated, highly complex financial island?
Yeah, it's a fascinating structural question about the evolution of global finance in the next decade.
It is definitely something to mull over as you pull your free credit report this week. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly detailed journey, for being curious about the hidden mechanics of the world around you, and for taking the time to truly decode the system. Stay curious, stay financially empowered, and we will catch you on the next deep dive. So if I told you that, being unfailingly polite at your very first job interview was going to cost you exactly $500,000 by the time you retire, I mean, would you still do it?
I'm guessing probably not, right?
Right. But today we are doing a deep dive into exactly that kind of thing. We're tearing down the invisible American financial machine, and we are, really looking at the gears underneath.
The stuff you don't usually see.
Exactly. Because usually when people talk about moving to the U.S. or even just becoming an adult in the U.S., the financial advice you get is, well, it's incredibly superficial.
It really is.
It's treated like this basic checklist, like open a checking account, download a budgeting app, remember to tip your waiter 20%.
Right. It's entirely focused on just the mechanics of a transaction. You perform action A, and you supposedly get result B, but that completely assumes the system is transparent, which it absolutely is not.
Not even close. If you actually look at the American money culture, you realize you're trying to run software on an operating system you don't even understand.
That's a great way to put it.
What you see on the surface, like the debit cards, the credit scores, those sleek banking apps, that is just the user interface. The vast majority of the system, the actual source code that determines whether you spend your life building wealth or just, treading water in perpetual debt, that's hidden completely out of sight.
And navigating a complex, highly engineered landscape like that without a map, it's incredibly dangerous. The system is fundamentally designed to optimize for its own growth, not necessarily your personal stability.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We are speaking directly to you, the listener. It really doesn't matter if you're a newcomer to the U.S. just stepping off a plane or a first-generation immigrant trying to translate tax law for your parents.
Or even someone who's been navigating this corporate system for a decade and just feels completely stuck.
Exactly. Or maybe you're just insanely curious about the behavioral psychology behind American money. Our goal today is to equip you with that beneath-the-surface knowledge. We have a massive stack of source material to get through today.
A very comprehensive guide.
Yeah, it covers everything. We're going to look at the high-stakes behavioral psychology of salary negotiation, the architecture of the $1.7 trillion student debt crisis, the emotional mechanics of consumerism.
Generational wealth.
Right, the historical reality of generational wealth. And we're even going to run through real-world word-for-word conversation scripts to use with your landlord.
So when you synthesize all of these different source materials, from macroeconomic data to, psychological studies on spending, a single overarching theme really emerges. And that theme is intentionality.
Intentionality, I like that.
Yeah. The overarching goal of this deep dive is to help you move from default financial behaviors to strategic, values-aligned decisions. Default behaviors are just the actions you take when you aren't thinking, right? The behavior is dictated by marketing algorithms or historical momentum.
Cultural pressure.
Exactly. Knowledge is most valuable when it's deeply understood and then actively applied. When you finally understand the architecture of this system, you stop being a passive consumer. You stop letting the current push you around, and you start becoming an active architect of your own financial reality.
Let's jump right into the deep end then. Let's start with the absolute gateway to wealth in America. Honestly, this is one of the most jarring cultural collisions for anyone entering the American professional world, and that's salary negotiation.
It is a profound psychological friction point, primarily because the rules of engagement are just entirely unspoken.
They are completely unspoken, and they run contrary to how so much of the world operates. Because if you look at many East Asian, South Asian, and Latin American cultures, negotiating your salary is heavily stigmatized.
Very much so.
I've talked to so many people who feel genuine guilt even thinking about it. In their home cultures, if an employer offers you a job, they are bestowing an opportunity upon you. Asking for more money is seen as aggressive.
It's seen as greedy.
Greedy, presumptuous, downright disrespectful to the hierarchy. The cultural script you are raised with is very clear. You accept what you are offered, you express deep, humble gratitude, and you prove your worth over time through sheer hard work.
But we have to look at the broader mechanism of American corporate culture here. If you play by those international rules in a U.S. corporate environment, that specific brand of politeness will actively, measurably harm you.
Wow, harm you.
Yes, because the American employer does not view a job offer as a benevolent gift. They view it as a strategic commodity purchase. They're buying your labor in a free market.
Right.
Therefore, not negotiating your salary isn't seen as polite deference. It's viewed as naive. Employers actually expect candidates to push back. In fact, the financial architecture of hiring is built around this exact expectation.
Wait, they build it in?
They do. Many hiring managers purposefully build what they call negotiation room into their initial budget models. So if a department has a firm budget of $100,000 for a specific role, they might extend an initial offer of, say, $90,000. Okay. They are fully anticipating that you will counter with a higher number.
Right.
If you just smile, say thank you, and accept the $90,000, they don't think, wow, what a remarkably polite and respectful employee. They think, great, we just secured our top candidate at a 10% discount.
And the long-term cost of that politeness is terrifying. Our sources highlight a staggering statistic from Carnegie Mellon University. Researchers there found that failing to negotiate your starting salary can cost an individual more than $500,000 over the course of a 30-year career.
It's massive.
$500,000 lost simply because someone didn't want to make a 10-minute phone call slightly awkward.
Well, we really need to explain the mathematical engine behind that $500,000 figure. Because it isn't just about the initial few paychecks. It's about the mathematical law of compound growth.
Oh, right. Compounding.
Exactly. In the corporate ecosystem, virtually every future financial milestone you achieve is tethered directly to that initial base salary. Let's say you get a standard 3% annual cost of living raise. That 3% is calculated against your base.
Yeah.
When you earn a 10% performance bonus at the end of the year, it's 10% of your base. When your employer matches your 401k retirement contributions up to 5%, that is a percentage of your base.
So if your base salary is $5,000 higher on day one just because you negotiate,
You aren't just getting an extra $5,000 this year.
that specific advantage multiplies.
Exactly. Next year's raise is bigger because the base is bigger, the bonus is bigger, the retirement match is bigger. That initial negotiation permanently alters the trajectory of your entire earning potential for decades.
Okay, so the stakes are sky high, $500,000. So how do we actually execute this without, sweating through our shirts?
Right.
The sources lay out a very specific 6-step strategy. Step 1 is research. Before you ever get on a Zoom call or walk into an HR office, you need hard data. You cannot just guess what you're worth.
You really can't.
You have to use aggregation tools like Glassdoor, Levels.ifi for tech pay scale, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You need to identify the exact market rate for your specific role in your specific industry at your specific experience level. And crucially, you have to look at your specific zip code.
Geography changes the math entirely.
It really does. For example, a mid-level software engineer with 3 years of experience sitting in San Francisco might command a salary range of $130,000 to $170,000. But if that exact same human being takes that exact same remote role while living in Austin, Texas, the market range might drop to $100,000 to $140,000.
And the underlying logic of this step 1 research is that data removes emotion from the battlefield.
Oh, I like that.
When you have the numbers, you shift the entire framing of the conversation. You are no longer saying, I want more money because my rent is high. You are saying the objective empirical market data dictates that this role commands this value. It completely depersonalizes the request.
I love that. Depersonalize the request. Which leads directly to step 2, the first offer. And this is where we get into some heavy behavioral economics.
Yes, this involves a cognitive bias known as the anchor point. In the psychology of negotiation, the very first number mentioned out loud in a conversation becomes the anchor. It acts as a gravitational center.
The gravitational center.
Yeah. Every subsequent counteroffer, every adjustment will naturally orbit around that initial number. The human brain literally cannot help but use that first number as the baseline for all future calculations.
Okay, so let's play this out. An internal recruiter calls you for a screening interview. 5 minutes in, they ask, so what are your salary expectations for this role? If you panic and you say $80,000 because you're terrified of aiming too high and scaring them off.
You just drop the anchor.
You just drop the anchor. Even if their internal budget was approved for $110,000, you just legally anchored your own value to $80,000. They are going to offer you $80,000, and they are going to be thrilled about it.
Precisely. You negotiated against yourself before the game even started, which is why the strategic move in step 2 is to deflect. When they ask for your expectations early in the process, you use a targeted script.
What's the script?
You say something like, I'd love to learn a bit more about the full scope of the role, the responsibilities, and the total compensation package before discussing specific numbers. However, could you share what range has been budgeted for this position?
Oh, that's smooth.
Right. You are politely declining to drop the anchor, and instead, you are handing them the heavy machinery and asking them to drop their budget as the anchor.
Deflect and let their budget set the floor. That is brilliant. Okay, moving to step 3, the pause. This is where I struggle because it goes against every human instinct.
It really does.
You've gone through 5 rounds of interviews, they finally call you, they make the offer, and let's say it's $95,000, exactly what you wanted. The immediate biological impulse is to yell, yes, thank you, I accept, I'll start Monday. But the rule says you have to pause. You must ask for 24 to 48 hours to review the official package.
It feels incredibly unnatural, but it communicates a deep level of professional maturity. You have to remember, no legitimate, reputable employer is going to rescind a job offer simply because a candidate asked for a single day to review a legal document outlining their livelihood.
Right, that would be crazy.
It would. In fact, it signals to the employer that you are analytical, deliberate, and not driven purely by emotion traits they generally want in their workforce.
Okay, we've paused. We've calmed our heart rate. Step 4 is the main event. The collaborative counteroffer. You've done the research, you've looked at the package, and now you have to ask for more money. But the phrasing here is a minefield, isn't it?
It is. You aren't issuing a list of demands like a hostage negotiator.
Right.
You are making a collaborative inquiry. Our sources highlight a masterclass script for this. You have to layer it perfectly.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First, you start by heavily expressing enthusiasm. I am truly thrilled about this role and the opportunity to join the team. Second, you cite your objective market data and remind them of your specific value.
So bringing it back to the research.
Exactly. Based on my research into the current market rates for this position in this region, and considering my 5 years of highly relevant experience in data analytics, and finally, the third layer. You ask a question. I was hoping we could discuss a base salary closer to the range of $185,000 to $110,000. Is there flexibility in the compensation budget?
If we break down why that framing works so well, I mean, it's because it disarms the biological threat response, right?
It's the bottom.
By leading with enthusiasm, you reassure the hiring manager that you actually want the job, ensuring they don't feel personally rejected. By citing data, you prove your request is rooted in reality, not just arbitrary greed. But the most important part is the ending. Is there flexibility?
Yes.
You are not backing them into a corner with an ultimatum. You are inviting them to sit on the same side of the table as you and solve a math problem together.
That's exactly the psychology.
I am going to stop you right there, though, because I really have to push back. Even hearing you explain the psychology, it still feels utterly terrifying.
Of course it does.
What if they just say no? Worse, what if they get offended? What if they pull the offer completely because you had the audacity to ask for another 10 grand? It feels like you finally found a sleeping bear that happens to be guarding a pile of gold, and the advice is to poke the bear to see if it'll give you slightly more gold. Why risk waking it up?
That is a deeply ingrained fear, especially for those operating outside their native cultural norms. But we have to look at the statistical reality of corporate behavior. Legitimate, healthy American companies expect this dance.
They do.
They do. Think about the mechanical reality from their perspective. They have just spent 6 weeks, dozens of internal hours, and thousands of dollars in recruiter fees to identify you as the optimal candidate.
Yeah.
You are their top choice.
True.
The hiring manager desperately wants to get back to their actual job instead of doing more interviews. They're absolutely not going to throw all that sunk cost and time away simply because you politely asked for a 5% increase based on empirical market data.
So the bear isn't sleeping. The bear is actually awake, sitting at a chessboard, waiting for you to make your opening move.
Exactly. The corporate entity is designed for this. Now, let's explore the edge case. What if an employer does punish you for a polite, data-driven negotiation?
Yeah, what if they get mad?
But if the hiring manager gets visibly angry or they immediately rescind the offer out of spite? If that happens, you need to understand that you did not make a mistake. They just handed you a massive, glaring red flag about their internal corporate culture.
Oh, wow.
They just showed you exactly how they handle minor conflict, how they view employee autonomy, and how rigidly they enforce compliance. If they act like that during the honeymoon phase of hiring, imagine what it's like to work for them when a project is failing. You didn't lose a job, you dodged a bullet.
That reframing is so helpful, just completely flips the perspective. But there have to be limits, right?
Of course. You must exercise situational awareness. You don't want to quibble over irrelevant margins. If they offer you $90,000, negotiating over an extra $500 makes you look petty and drains the goodwill you'll need on day one.
Right.
Furthermore, you never, ever issue an empty ultimatum like saying, give me $100K or I walk. Unless you literally have a competing job offer signed in your other hand and are fully prepared to walk away that minute.
Okay, let's say they come back to step 4 and they say, listen, we love you, but the base salary is absolutely rigidly firm. The budget is locked at $90,000. We cannot do $100,000. Are we just done?
No, because American compensation is a multi-lever system. That brings us to step 5. Negotiate beyond base. If the base salary lever is jammed, you start pulling the other levers. You ask for a signing bonus.
Wait, why would they say yes to a signing bonus if they said no to a higher salary? Isn't it all just money leaving their bank account?
It is, but it comes from different accounting buckets. A base salary increase is a recurring liability. If they give you an extra $10,000 in base, they have to pay you that $10,000 every single year, plus the compounding raises we discussed earlier.
All right, that makes sense.
A signing bonus is a one-time line item. It doesn't permanently inflate their payroll overhead. It is much easier for a manager to get a one-time $10,000 bonus approved than a permanent $10,000 raise.
Oh, okay.
If they can't do a bonus, you pivot to other levers. You ask for an extra week of paid time off or PTO. You negotiate for equity or stock options. You ask for a guaranteed hybrid schedule with 2 remote work days a week, or a dedicated $2,000 annual budget for your own professional development and conferences. There is almost always a lever that can move.
And finally, step 6. Get it all in writing. Because in the American corporate system, if it is not documented on a PDF, it literally does not exist.
Absolutely true.
Verbal agreements made over the phone with a friendly recruiter are completely non-binding. You need the revised, official offer letter clearly stating the finalized base salary, the start date, the benefits, and any negotiated additions like that signing bonus before you formally sign and accept.
It creates an undeniable, legally binding baseline that protects both you and the employer from future miscommunication.
So you've run the gauntlet, you negotiated the salary, you pulled the levers, and you are maximizing your earning potential. Earning the right salary is the absolute foundation of building wealth in America. But here is the brutal, almost tragic irony of the American system.
Yeah.
What happens when you start your professional life finally earning that great salary, but you are dragging an anchor behind you? What happens when you are carrying the weight of a mortgage-sized debt without actually having a house to live in? That brings us to the uniquely American phenomenon of student loans.
This is perhaps the most defining and often crippling financial characteristic of the modern American worker. For someone who didn't grow up inside this specific educational ecosystem, the sheer scope of this debt is incredibly difficult to comprehend.
We really need to look at the macroeconomic scale of this before we get into the mechanics. The total U.S. student loan debt currently sits at $1.7 trillion. Trillion, with a T.
Mind-boggling.
That massive pool of debt is carried by roughly 44 million individual borrowers across the country. The average borrower owes somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000, but it is incredibly common, especially in fields requiring graduate degrees like law, medicine, or advanced sciences, to see people carrying balances of $100,000, $200,000, or more.
Oh, easily.
If you look at international norms, the American system is a staggering anomaly. In countries like Germany or across Scandinavia, higher education is practically free, heavily subsidized by the state as a public good. Even in places like the UK or Australia where tuition does exist, the repayment systems are far more forgiving. They are usually tied directly to your income through the tax system, and they automatically pause if your income drops below a certain threshold.
But in the United States, higher education has been aggressively commodified. It is treated as a consumer product.
Yeah.
Let's look at the baseline costs.
Okay.
The average cost of a 4-year public university for an in-state student, meaning you attend a government-funded school in the state where you already live and pay taxes, is roughly $25,000 to $30,000 per year when you factor in tuition, room, board, and books.
Wow.
If you decide to go out of state, or if you attend a private university, those costs skyrocket to anywhere from $50,000 to $85,000 per year. The math is inescapable. A standard 4-year bachelor's degree can easily cost between $100,000 and $300,000.
Which is just...
And since the vast majority of 18-year-olds do not have access to hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital, the entire higher education system relies completely on debt financing.
Which means if you are going to survive this system, we need to decode the types of loans, because not all debt is created equal. The landscape is mostly dominated by federal student loans, which are issued directly by the U.S. government. And within that federal system, there are two primary categories you absolutely must understand: direct subsidized and direct unsubsidized loans.
Let's break the mechanics of those down because the difference between them dictates how much pain you will be in after graduation.
Yeah, please.
Direct subsidized loans are awarded based on demonstrated financial need. The operative word here is subsidized. That means the federal government is literally paying the interest that accrues on the loan while you are actively enrolled in school at least half-time.
So it's paused.
Right. Also during your 6-month post-graduation grace period and during any authorized periods of deferment. It is a highly favorable arrangement because the balance doesn't grow while you are studying.
Right. But then you have direct unsubsidized loans. These are available to almost any student, regardless of their family's financial need. And here is where the trap is set. With an unsubsidized loan, the interest starts accruing the very second the loan money is dispersed to your university.
Yes, immediately.
Even while you are sitting in your freshman dorm room taking notes in Biology 101, that loan is quietly growing in the background. And here is the truly terrifying mechanism. If you don't pay that accruing interest out of your own pocket while you're in school, it capitalizes.
Capitalization is a financial mechanism that every borrower needs to understand deeply. It is the engine of insurmountable debt.
How does it work?
Capitalization means that all the unpaid interest that built up over your 4 years of college is taken and permanently added to the principal balance of your loan. So when you finally graduate, you don't just owe the original amount you borrowed. You owe what you borrowed plus all that accrued interest.
So the principal grows.
Exactly. And from that day forward, the bank calculates your new interest charges based on that new inflated balance.
Yeah.
You are literally paying interest on your interest.
I've always hated the metaphor of a financial snowball rolling down a hill to describe capitalized interest. It sounds too gentle. Capitalized interest isn't a snowball, it is a biological parasite.
That's a vivid way to put it.
Well, it attaches to the host, your original loan.
Yeah.
It eats the host, and then it breeds, creating more interest, and then you are forced to pay for the offspring of the original debt. You borrow $50,000 to get a degree. By the time you walk across the stage to get your diploma, the parasite has grown and you owe $60,000. And now your 6% interest rate is calculated on $60,000, not $50,000. It is a brutal mathematical reality.
It really is.
And then on top of those standard federal loans, the system offers PLUS loans for graduate students and parents, which carry much higher interest rates, and private loans from commercial banks, which offer almost none of the safety nets we are about to discuss.
Which brings us to the architecture of repayment and the escape routes that the government has built into the system.
Thank goodness there are escape routes.
If you do nothing and just accept the default path, you are placed on the standard repayment plan for federal loans. This plan takes your total capitalized balance, calculates the interest, and divides it into 120 equal monthly payments spread over exactly 10 years.
Okay.
Mathematically, this plan saves you the most money over the life of a loan because you pay it off quickly. But practically, the monthly payments are often crushingly high, easily taking up a massive percentage of a new graduate's take-home pay.
So what happens when a 23-year-old looks at a $900 monthly student loan bill and realizes their entry-level job only pays them $3,000 a month? I mean, they can't afford to eat and pay the loan.
That is where they must utilize income-driven repayment plans, commonly referred to as IDR. These plans act as a vital systemic safety net. Instead of calculating your payment based on how much you owe, IDR plans cap your monthly payment at a specific percentage of your discretionary income, historically ranging from 10 to 20%, depending on the specific plan. If your income is exceptionally low, or if you lose your job entirely, your required monthly payment could literally drop to $0, and it still counts as an on-time payment.
Wow, $0.
Yes. But the most crucial mechanism of IDR is the forgiveness clause. After making consistent payments on an IDR plan for 20 to 25 years, depending on whether the loans were for undergraduate or graduate study, any remaining balance is legally forgiven by the government.
20 years is a long time to carry that weight. But for those willing to work in the public sector, there is a much faster escape route, right? Public Service Loan Forgiveness, or PSLF.
Yes, PSLF.
This program is an absolute game changer. The mechanics are precise. If you work full-time for a qualifying employer, which includes federal, state, or local government agencies, 501c3 nonprofit organizations, public school systems, or public hospitals, and you make 120 qualifying monthly payments while enrolled in an IDR plan, your entire remaining federal loan balance is completely forgiven, tax-free. That means you are out in 10 years instead of 20 or 25.
Now, regarding student loans, we must impartially report on the current landscape because it is an incredibly volatile and heavily politicized space.
Right.
As a listener, you need to be aware that there are ongoing, intense policy debates across all branches of the U.S. government regarding the legality and scope of broader student loan forgiveness. There have been recent temporary waivers, executive actions, and judicial injunctions adjusting how IDR plans are calculated and who qualifies for relief.
It's constantly changing.
It is. However, the critical, actionable takeaway for our listeners is this. You cannot build a financial strategy on political promises or news headlines. Administrations change, and court rulings overturn policies overnight. You must manage your debt based strictly on the laws and programs that are legally active today, and you must stay relentlessly informed by directly checking your account on the official federal student aid website.
You have to play the board exactly as it's set right now, not how a politician promises it might look in 2 years. And speaking of playing the board, this brings up a really important warning from our sources. I see these ads everywhere, on podcasts, on YouTube, in the mail. They are from private financial companies offering to refinance your federal student loans to a much lower interest rate.
Yes, very common.
The marketing pitch is incredibly seductive. They say, why pay the government 6.8% when you can refinance with us for 4.2%? It sounds like a no-brainer, right? Lower interest means less money paid. But there is a massive, often irreversible hidden trap there. Why do these companies want your loans so badly?
They want your loans because they are cherry-picking the lowest-risk borrowers, usually high-earning professionals, to guarantee a profit. But for the borrower, refinancing can be a catastrophic mistake.
Why?
If you take your federal student loans and refinance them into a private loan with a commercial bank, you permanently sever your relationship with the federal government. By doing so, you instantly and irreversibly lose all federal protections, all of them. You permanently lose access to all income-driven repayment plans. You lose the ability to place your loans in a federal administrative forbearance or deferment if you get laid off or have a medical emergency. And most devastatingly, you permanently disqualify yourself from the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program.
Ouch.
You are trading a massive, highly flexible, multi-decade safety net for a slightly lower interest rate. Unless you have an incredibly secure, high-paying career, zero intention of ever working in the public sector, and a massive emergency fund to cover you if you lose your job, the risk of abandoning the federal system is rarely worth the marginal interest savings.
And if you stay in the federal system, but you just decide to stop paying because you're overwhelmed, the consequences of default are severe. The government doesn't operate like a normal credit card company. They don't just send your file to a collection agency that calls you during dinner.
No, they have far more power.
The federal government possesses extraordinary collection powers. They can garnish your wages without taking you to court first, meaning they legally mandate your employer to pull a percentage of your money straight out of your paycheck before you even see it. They can intercept and seize your annual tax refunds. And if you carry that default into old age, they can even garnish your Social Security retirement benefits decades later.
The overarching lesson regarding the structural burden of student loans is the necessity of proactive communication. If you find yourself in a position where you cannot afford your monthly payment, the worst possible action is to hide.
Don't ignore the mail.
Do not ignore the mail.
Aye.
You contact your loan servicer immediately. The federal system has built-in legal mechanisms like hardship forbearance, deferment, and IDR recalculations specifically designed to prevent you from defaulting. But the system is entirely reactive. You have to initiate the process.
Okay, so we've talked about the legitimate legal structures that can systematically drain your wealth, like student debt and capitalized interest. You can navigate those by understanding the rules. But while you are meticulously managing your federal loans, there is an entire shadow economy operating in the background, actively trying to steal your money completely outside the confines of the law.
A very dangerous shadow economy.
Navigating the American financial landscape means knowing how to spot financial predators, which brings us to the psychology of surviving financial scams.
This represents a critical pivot in our discussion, because while student loans are a heavy structural burden you agree to take on, scams are targeted, malicious, and entirely non-consensual attacks. And what's vital to understand from a demographic perspective is that newcomers to the U.S. immigrants, international students, temporary workers, and newly naturalized citizens are vastly disproportionately targeted by these predators.
Why is that? Why is the shadow economy so focused on people who are just trying to get established?
Because scammers operate by exploiting a lack of systemic familiarity. Newcomers are operating in an environment where the baseline rules are still alien to them. They don't yet possess the cultural intuition for what normal institutional behavior looks like in America.
Right, they don't know the norms.
Exactly. If you immigrate from a country where the local police or regional tax authorities frequently and aggressively call citizens to demand immediate payment or threaten instant arrest for compliance failures, then receiving an aggressive phone call from someone claiming to be the American IRS sounds terrifyingly plausible. The scammer weaponizes the victim's underlying fear of the state and their desire to comply with the rules of their new country.
That makes me incredibly angry because they are weaponizing people's desire to be good citizens. But that is exactly why we need to drag these tactics into the light. The sources detail the most dangerous scams currently operating, and we are going to unpack the mechanics of how they actually work.
Let's do it.
Scam number 1, IRS and immigration scams. You're sitting at home, your phone rings, and the caller ID actually says Internal Revenue Service or U.S. Customs and Border Protection because they spoofed the number.
Very common tactic.
The person on the other end speaks with intense authority. They tell you that there is a severe discrepancy in your tax filings or a critical problem with your visa status. They say a warrant has been issued, and if you do not pay the fine immediately over the phone using prepaid gift cards, wire transfers, or cryptocurrency, local police will arrive at your door to arrest or deport you within the hour.
The defense against this specific attack vector is a hard, absolute, non-negotiable rule of American bureaucracy. The IRS and federal immigration authorities simply do not initiate contact via phone calls to demand immediate money.
Never.
Never. They do not use local police to conduct surprise arrests over minor tax discrepancies. And absolutely no legitimate U.S. government agency, state or federal, will ever ask a citizen to pay legal debt using Apple gift cards, Target gift cards, or a Bitcoin ATM.
Yeah, that part should be a dead giveaway.
It should be. The American government operates on paperwork. If the IRS needs to contact you regarding a debt, they will send a formal letter through the United States Postal Service.
Yeah.
If you receive a phone call matching that threatening description, you do not argue with them, you do not try to explain yourself, you hang up the phone immediately.
Scam number 2, rental scams. You just moved to a new city, say Chicago or Seattle, and you're desperately searching for an apartment on platforms like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. You find an absolutely stunning place in a great neighborhood, and the rent is suspiciously low, maybe 30% below market value.
A huge red flag.
You email the landlord. They reply with a long, elaborate story. They tell you they are out of the country doing missionary work or they've been relocated for military deployment. They say you can go look at the outside of the building, but they took the keys with them. However, if you wire them the security deposit and first month's rent right now to secure it, they will FedEx the keys to you tomorrow. You wire the money, and they vanish completely. The apartment was either entirely fabricated or it was a real, legitimate listing that they stole the photos and address from to create a ghost listing.
The psychological triggers being pulled here are scarcity and urgency. Finding housing is inherently stressful. They offer a deal that relieves that stress, a beautiful, cheap apartment, but they manufacture an artificial time constraint to prevent you from thinking critically.
So what's the rule of thumb?
The rule of thumb in American real estate is strict. Never, under any circumstances, transfer money for an apartment you haven't physically walked inside, and never sign a lease without independently verifying that the person you are communicating with actually owns the property or represents the legitimate property management company.
Scam number 3, bank phishing. This one happens to everyone. You get a text message or an email that visually perfectly replicates the branding of Bank of America, Chase, or Wells Fargo. The message says, "Urgent. Suspicious login attempt detected on your account from a foreign device. Your account has been temporarily frozen. Click here immediately to verify your identity and restore access."
They want you to panic.
You panic because you need to buy groceries. You click the link. It takes you to a beautifully designed website that looks exactly like your bank's portal. You type in your username and password, and boom, the site captures your keystrokes. The scammers now possess your actual login credentials, and they drain your checking account.
Once again, the methodology relies on exploiting a sudden spike in fear to bypass rational thought. The defense mechanism is simple behavioral conditioning. Never click a hyperlink provided in an unsolicited text message or email, regardless of how official it looks.
Always go to the source.
Exactly. If you receive an alert that worries you, close the message. Open a fresh web browser, manually type in your bank's known web address yourself, and log in securely. Alternatively, flip your debit card over and dial the official 1-800 number printed on the back.
Now, scam number 4 is insidious. It is called employment scams, specifically the check washing or overpayment variant. I want to spend time on this because it actively exploits the American banking system itself.
This one is devastating.
Let's walk through the timeline. You are looking for a job. You get hired for a remote position, usually something like data entry, virtual assistance, or customer service. The interview process might seem a bit rushed, conducted entirely over an app like Telegram or WhatsApp. The company says you're hired. They mail you a physical cashier's check for, let's say, $3,000. They give you highly specific instructions. Deposit this check into your personal account. Keep a $500 signing bonus for yourself, but we need you to use the remaining $2,500 to purchase your mandated home office equipment, a specific laptop and software, but you must buy it from our approved corporate vendor using Zelle or Cash App.
The approved vendor.
So you take a picture of the check with your banking app. You deposit it. The very next morning, you open your app, and miraculously, your available balance has increased by exactly $3,000. The money is sitting right there.
Yeah.
Feeling secure, you send $2,500 of your money via Zelle to their vendor.
Oh, no.
A week goes by. Suddenly, you get a notification from your bank. They inform you that the original $3,000 check was a sophisticated forgery. It bounced. The bank instantly deducts the $3,000 from your account, but the $2,500 you sent via Zelle, that is untraceable and gone forever. You are now personally in the negative for $2,500.
It is a devastating scenario that ruins people financially for years. And this situation raises a fundamental question about the architecture of American banking that confuses almost everyone. Why on earth do banks make the funds from a fake check available to you immediately if the check hasn't actually cleared the complex interbank settlement process?
That is exactly what I want to know. Why do they show the money in my account? It feels like the bank is actively setting the customer up to be robbed.
It certainly feels like a trap, but ironically, it actually stems from well-intentioned consumer protection laws. Specifically the Expedited Funds Availability Act, which was passed by Congress in 1987.
Wait, a consumer protection law causes this?
Let me explain the history. Decades ago, banks had a terrible habit of holding deposited checks for weeks at a time. They would take your paycheck, hold it in limbo, and earn overnight interest on your money, while you, the consumer, couldn't buy groceries or pay rent.
Okay,
The public was outraged. To stop that abuse, federal regulations were passed that legally required banks to make deposited funds available to the customer very quickly, often within 1 or 2 business days, depending on the type of check.
So the law forces the bank to trust the piece of paper up front.
Exactly. The law mandates availability. However, the actual physical and digital process of verifying that, check routing it from your bank to the Federal Reserve, then to the bank that supposedly issued the check, verifying the account exists, verifying the funds exist, and then transferring the money back. That back-end clearing process can still take several days.
Or even weeks.
If it's a highly sophisticated forgery from an international entity. Scammers are intimately aware of this regulatory timeline. They're purposely exploiting the chronological gap between when the funds are legally required to be made available to you in your app and when the check actually definitively clears the banking system.
That's so manipulative.
They pressure you, to wire real money out of your account during that narrow window of false security. By the time the fraud is detected by the clearinghouse, your real money is long gone, and because you authorized the Zelle transfer, the bank holds you liable.
That is deeply unsettling because it means seeing the money in your account is an illusion until the check fully clears weeks later. The operational rule there is absolute. A legitimate American employer will never, ever send you a check up front and ask you to send some of the money back to them or forward it to a third party. If they want you to have equipment, a real company will simply mail you a laptop directly.
Exactly.
Okay, moving on. Scam number 5. Romance scams. You meet someone on a dating app or even through a seemingly random message on social media. They are attractive, engaging, and they build a deep, intense emotional connection with you over a period of weeks or months. They talk about a future together.
But they never want to meet.
Right. There is always a convoluted excuse for why they can't meet on video or in person. Eventually, after the hook is deeply set, a tragedy strikes. They claim they are stuck at an overseas airport and their passport was stolen, or they had a sudden, severe medical emergency, or they need help paying a customs fee to release a package of gold they are sending you. They plead for you to wire them emergency funds. They manipulate your empathy.
It is the purest form of emotional hacking. It bypasses logic by hijacking the human desire for connection. The scammers will often spend months cultivating a single victim, treating it as a full-time job.
So what's the defense?
The defensive rule is painful but necessary. Do not send money, wire funds, or buy crypto for someone you have never physically met in person, no matter how convincing their narrative is, how deep your emotional connection feels, or how desperate their supposed emergency appears.
And finally, scam number 6. Crypto and investment scams. Someone messages you, often joining a group chat you are in or messaging you directly on WhatsApp. They present themselves as a highly successful trader. They promise guaranteed risk-free returns. They say, give me $1,000 and my proprietary AI trading bot will guarantee you a 20% return every single week in the Forex or crypto markets. They show you screenshots of massive wealth cars, watches, bank balances. You send them the $1,000. They give you a login to a beautifully designed, entirely fake dashboard.
And you see the numbers go up.
You watch the numbers go up. Your $1,000 turns into $5,000. But the moment you try to withdraw your profits, the trap springs. They tell you that you must first pay a $1,500 liquidation tax or blockchain fee to release the funds. If you pay it, they just demand more fees until you realize it's a scam, and then they disappear.
This exploits greed and the illusion of easy wealth. The fundamental law to remember here is that in the world of finance, risk and reward are permanently, inextricably tethered together. If anyone, anywhere, promises you guaranteed, exceptionally high returns with absolutely zero risk, they are lying to you. It violates the fundamental laws of economics.
So, what is the action plan if someone listening right now realizes, with the sinking feeling in their stomach, that they are currently in the middle of one of these scams?
The response requires immediate emotional triage. First, stop all communication instantly. Do not confront them. Do not tell them you know they are scammers. Just cut contact and block the numbers.
Okay.
Second, do not send another cent. Scammers will often perform a recovery scam where they pretend to be a hacker or an agent who can get your money back for an upfront fee. It's the exact same scammer.
Wow, they hit you twice.
Third, report the fraud officially to the Federal Trade Commission at reportfraud.ftc.gov. Fourth, file a report with your local police department. The police likely won't recover the funds, but you will absolutely need that official police report number to prove to your bank that you are a victim of a crime. Fifth, contact your bank's fraud department immediately to lock down your accounts. And finally, if you compromise personal identity information like giving them your social security number, immediately contact the 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and place a fraud alert or a total freeze on your credit files to prevent them from opening credit cards in your name.
Okay, that is the dark side of the system. Scams can drain your bank account maliciously, but sometimes it isn't a malicious actor. Sometimes legitimate catastrophic life events like a sudden severe medical emergency, a prolonged period of unemployment, or a devastating divorce can lead to insurmountable debt.
Yes, real life happens.
When the math simply no longer works, when your required minimum payments exceed your total ability to earn income for the rest of your natural life, you are trapped. But the American legal system does not want a permanent class of indentured servants. It provides a legal reset button, and that brings us to the ultimate safety valve, destigmatizing bankruptcy.
This is a topic that is deeply shrouded in shame within American culture. We have a societal narrative that celebrates the self-made billionaire, the person who builds an empire from nothing. But conversely, we deeply, profoundly stigmatize the person who falls into financial ruin.
We really do.
We equate financial failure with moral failure. Yet, if we look at the macroeconomic data, it tells a very different story about how common and perhaps necessary this mechanism is. Depending on the economic cycle, between 400,000 and 500,000 Americans file for personal bankruptcy every single year.
We really do treat bankruptcy like a scarlet letter. People talk about it in hushed tones, like it means you are a fundamentally bad, reckless, and irresponsible person who bought too many flat-screen TVs. But looking at the sources, it's really much more like a financial emergency room.
Exactly.
Nobody wakes up and says, I'd love to go to the emergency room today. You try everything in your power to avoid it. You change your diet, you exercise. But if you fall off a roof and shatter your leg in 3 places, you are incredibly glad the trauma surgeons exist to put you back together.
That is an incredibly apt metaphor. Bankruptcy is not a punishment. It is a legal, constitutional process designed to prevent crushing unpayable debt from creating a permanent economic underclass. It is an economic triage tool. And to truly understand how it functions, we need to distinguish between the 2 primary avenues of personal bankruptcy in the U.S., Chapter 7 and Chapter 13.
Let's start with Chapter 7. This is often referred to in legal terms as liquidation bankruptcy. The core concept is that a federal court issues an order that permanently wipes out or discharges the vast majority of your unsecured debts.
Right.
We are talking about credit card balances, crippling medical bills, and personal loans. Poof, legally gone. The process is also relatively fast, usually taking only 3 to 6 months from filing to discharge. But the terrifying part for most people is that word liquidation.
People hear that and panic.
They do. They hear that, and they have this cinematic fear that government agents are going to show up at their house, kick them to the curb, tow their car, and auction off their grandmother's wedding ring to pay the credit card company.
And that specific fear is exactly what prevents many desperate people from seeking the legal help they are entitled to. The reality of Chapter 7 is far more nuanced and protective than the word liquidation implies.
How so?
While it is a liquidation on paper, both state and federal bankruptcy laws provide what are called exemptions. These exemptions are legal carve-outs designed to protect the essential property you need to maintain a basic standard of living. The system doesn't want to make you homeless.
Okay, give me an example.
For example, in many states, you are allowed to keep your primary home up to a certain equity limit. That's the homestead exemption. You can usually keep a primary vehicle to get to work. You keep your standard personal belongings, clothing, and furniture. Your qualified retirement accounts, like your 401k, are heavily protected.
Oh, wow.
And crucially, there are exemptions for the tools of the trade. If you are a carpenter, they do not take your saws, because taking your ability to earn a living defeats the purpose of a fresh start. For many lower-income filers, their total assets fall entirely within these exemption limits, meaning their debts are legally wiped out and they lose absolutely no physical property in the process.
That is a massive relief to understand. But what if you do have assets? What if you own a house with a lot of equity, or you make a decent salary, but you are just drowning in past due bills?
Then you look at Chapter 13.
Right, which is known as reorganization bankruptcy. This operates on a completely different mechanic.
Yeah.
It doesn't wipe out the debt immediately. Instead, the bankruptcy court looks at your steady income, calculates your essential living expenses, and sets up a strict court-mandated 3 to 5 year repayment plan. You pay a consolidated amount, whatever the court deems you can reasonably afford to a bankruptcy trustee every month for that 3 to 5 year period. The trustee distributes it to your creditors. And the magic is, at the end of that time frame, whatever qualifying unsecured debt remains unpaid is permanently discharged. Why would someone voluntarily choose to endure a 5-year repayment plan under Chapter 13 instead of the quick wipeout of Chapter 7?
There are usually 2 primary reasons. First, they might simply make too much money. There's a means test for Chapter 7, and if your income is above the median for your state, you might be legally forced into a Chapter 13.
Okay, and the second reason?
The second and more common reason is the strategic protection of assets, specifically a home facing foreclosure. If you are behind on your mortgage and the bank is trying to take your house, filing Chapter 13 immediately halts the foreclosure process. It allows you to roll those past due mortgage payments into your 3 to 5 year repayment plan. It buys you time to catch up on the arrears while keeping a roof over your family's head.
But we absolutely have to set the boundaries here because bankruptcy is a powerful legal tool, but it is not a magic wand. It does not erase everything.
No, it doesn't.
As we mentioned in the last segment, it almost never erases federal or private student loan debt outside of extremely rare and difficult to prove cases of undue hardship. It categorically does not erase child support or alimony obligations. It generally will not erase recent tax debts owed to the IRS. And it definitely will not erase debts that a judge determines you incurred through deliberate fraud or malicious behavior.
Right.
Plus, pulling the ripcord leaves a massive, highly visible scar on your credit report. A Chapter 13 filing stays on your credit report for 7 years, and a Chapter 7 stays on for a full 10 years. During that decade, borrowing money to buy a car or a house will be incredibly difficult, and if you can get approved, the interest rates will be punitive.
Which is exactly why returning to your emergency room metaphor is appropriate. You do not file for bankruptcy casually over a $5,000 credit card bill that you just don't feel like paying. It is the option of last resort.
What should you do before filing?
Before you file, you should aggressively explore debt negotiation, settling with creditors for a lower amount. You should look into formal debt management plans structured through accredited nonprofit credit counseling agencies. But we must look at the systemic reality that drives people to this point.
Right.
What's fascinating and deeply tragic about the American system is that the number one cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States is not reckless spending on luxury vacations or designer clothes. It is medical debt.
Medical debt.
Because healthcare is tied to employment and managed by private insurance, even families with decent health insurance can be completely bankrupted by a single severe illness like cancer or a catastrophic car accident. The combination of high deductibles, out-of-network hospital charges, and the sudden loss of income during a 6-month recovery period is a mathematical disaster.
It's just devastating.
When a society structures its healthcare system such that getting sick can ruin you financially, utilizing a legal tool to survive that system is not a moral failing. We must separate the math from the morality and remove the shame from the equation.
Absolutely. The system is flawed and you use the tools available to survive it. So to avoid the rigidity of that system, to avoid the corporate layoffs, to avoid being tied to a single employer for health insurance, or simply to build a more autonomous and flexible life, millions of Americans are making a radical decision.
The gig economy.
Yes, they are abandoning traditional W-2 employment entirely. They are rejecting the 9-to-5 cubicle. But this new freedom to be your own boss comes with a massive hidden tax trap that completely blindsides people. Let's explore the illusion of freedom, surviving the gig economy.
The rise of the gig economy represents a fundamental generational shift in how Americans interact with the concept of work. We are currently looking at roughly 36% of the U.S. workforce participating in independent work in some capacity.
That's over a third of the workforce.
It is a vast spectrum. It includes rideshare drivers for Uber and Lyft, freelance graphic designers on platforms like Fiverr, high-level corporate consultants, Etsy creators selling crafts, and independent contractors across virtually every industry.
And the appeal is obvious, right? You are your own boss. You set your own hours. You decide who you work with. But here is the independent contractor trap that our sources highlight. When you make the transition from being a traditional employee to being a gig worker, you lose the invisible safety net that traditional corporate employers provide.
Most people don't even realize what their employer does for them in the background.
They really don't. When you are a standard W-2 employee, your company's HR and payroll departments handle an immense amount of complexity. They automatically calculate and withhold your federal and state income taxes from every paycheck. They pay exactly half of your required Social Security and Medicare taxes.
Yes.
They negotiate and subsidize your health insurance premiums. They pay into state unemployment insurance funds, so you have a safety net if you are laid off, and they carry workers' compensation insurance in case you are injured on the job. When you strike out on your own and become a 1099 independent contractor, every single piece of that invisible infrastructure vanishes instantly.
You receive a check for the gross amount of your earnings. And the psychological trap is profound. You look at that $5,000 freelance check, and your brain immediately thinks, this is all my money.
But it's not.
It is emphatically not. By becoming an independent contractor, you have essentially inherited the entire administrative, legal, and tax burden of a corporation, consolidated squarely onto your own individual shoulders.
And the biggest, most painful shock for first-year freelancers is the infamous self-employment tax. I'm going to stop and unpack this math specifically because misunderstanding this single concept ruins people's lives come April.
It really does.
When you are a normal employee, the government requires a 15.3% tax to fund Social Security and Medicare. But as an employee, you only see half of that. You pay 7.65% out of your paycheck, and your corporate employer quietly pays the matching 7.65% out of their own pocket. But when you are self-employed, the IRS views you as both the employee and the employer, which means you are legally responsible for both halves. You have to pay the full, brutal 15.3% self-employment tax on your net business earnings. And that 15.3% is on top of your regular federal income tax and on top of your state income tax.
It is a staggering tax burden for the unprepared. If you don't plan for it, it will crush you. And the IRS is not going to politely wait until tax day in April to collect that money. Because you don't have an employer withholding taxes from every paycheck, the IRS requires you as a business owner to make quarterly estimated tax payments.
Oh, quarterly.
You have to calculate what you owe and send the government a check 4 times a year. If you ignore this and wait until the annual deadline to pay your massive bill, you will not only owe the taxes, but the IRS will hit you with significant underpayment penalties and interest charges.
This is exactly why the golden rule for gig workers, the absolute non-negotiable survival tactic mentioned in the sources, is the 25 to 30% rule. It requires iron discipline. The very moment you get paid for a gig, before you buy groceries, before you pay your rent, before you treat yourself to dinner, you immediately route 25 to 30% of every single dollar into a separate, entirely untouched bank account labeled taxes.
It's the only.
If you make $1,000 designing a logo, $300 goes instantly to the tax account. You must psychologically pretend that $300 never existed.
Implementing that structural discipline is the only way to prevent the catastrophic surprise of a $10,000 tax bill that you have absolutely no liquid cash to pay.
Okay.
However, the system is not entirely punitive. There is a substantial, highly lucrative silver lining to operating as an independent contractor, and it involves fundamentally changing how the tax code views your lifestyle expenses.
Yes. Deductions. This is the part where the math actually starts working in your favor. Let's explain the difference. When you are a W-2 employee, the math is you earn money, the government taxes you on everything you earned, and then you try to live your life on whatever cash is left over.
Right.
But when you are a business owner, and as a gig worker, you are a sole proprietor business owner, the formula flips. You make money, you spend money on your business expenses, and the government only taxes you on the profit that remains. You literally get to deduct the cost of doing business to lower your taxable income.
This is where meticulous tracking becomes incredibly lucrative. Every legitimate business expense reduces your tax burden. If you drive your personal car to deliver for Uber or to drive to a client's office for a consulting meeting, you can deduct the mileage.
How much is it?
In 2024, the IRS standard mileage rate is 67 cents per mile. If you drive 10,000 miles for work over the year, that is a $6,700 deduction directly off your taxable income.
That's
If you use a dedicated spare room in your apartment exclusively as your home office, you can take the home office deduction, writing off a percentage of your rent and utilities. You can deduct the cost of your laptop, a percentage of your internet and cell phone bill, your professional software subscriptions, and your marketing materials.
Wait, you mentioned earlier setting up a SEP IRA or a solo 401k. I want to pause on that because a lot of gig workers think retirement accounts are only for corporate employees. What actually is a SEP IRA, and how does it help a freelancer with taxes?
A SEP IRA stands for Simplified Employee Pension Individual Retirement Arrangement. It is a powerful tool specifically designed for self-employed individuals and small business owners. Because you don't have a corporate 401k match, the government allows you to create your own. With a SEP IRA, you can contribute and deduct from your taxes, up to roughly 25% of your net self-employment earnings, up to a massive annual limit, over $60,000 depending on the year. So if you had a great year and made $100,000 consulting, you could potentially funnel $20,000 into a SEP IRA. That money grows for your retirement, and it immediately reduces your taxable income for the year by $20,000. It is one of the most effective ways to shelter gig income from high tax brackets.
But the IRS won't just take your word for all these deductions. You can't just write $5,000 for office supplies on a napkin and expect them to accept it.
Exactly. The burden of proof is entirely on you. This requires diligent, systematic bookkeeping. You cannot wait until tax season in April to try and scroll through your credit card statements to remember how many miles you drove to a client meeting back in February. You will lose thousands of dollars in deductions that way.
So what's the solution?
You must treat your freelance work like a real corporation. You should use dedicated accounting software like QuickBooks Self-Employed or specialized mileage trackers like Stride. Proper ongoing record keeping turns what feels like an oppressive tax nightmare into a series of highly manageable, legally protected business expenses.
So let's step back and look at the journey so far. Let's say you've successfully navigated the gauntlet. You negotiated your corporate salary like a pro, you managed your student loans without defaulting, you didn't fall for the check washing scam, you dodged the bankruptcy emergency room, and you diligently saved 30% of your gig income for taxes while tracking your deductions.
A very successful journey.
You finally actually have some discretionary cash in your pocket. You have a surplus. But the very moment you have that cash, you step out your front door or you open your phone and you face the most sophisticated psychological machine ever built in human history, American consumer culture. Welcome to the consumption machine.
It is a profoundly powerful, almost omnipresent force. To truly understand why wealth accumulation is so difficult in America, you have to examine the psychological environment in which money is spent.
The environment.
Yes, the average American is navigating a hyper-commercialized landscape. Research indicates we are exposed to somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 advertisements every single day.
10,000? That's insane.
They are inescapable. They are on highway billboards. They are seamlessly integrated into social media feeds. They are embedded by influencers in podcasts. They line the shelves of grocery stores. And they are algorithmically targeted to your specific granular desires based on the data harvested from your browser history.
It's relentless, and it creates an underlying culture that doesn't just encourage spending, it normalizes it and even moralizes it. Think about the vocabulary we use. We use phrases like retail therapy, essentially equating the act of buying a new sweater or a gadget to necessary psychiatric care for a bad day.
Right.
We say things like treat yourself and YOLO, you only live once.
Oh, yeah.
These aren't just harmless, fun catchphrases. They are deeply embedded emotional justifications designed by marketers to bypass our rational, long-term financial planning. They program us to believe that if we feel sad, spending money will alleviate the sadness. If we feel unappreciated at work, buying a luxury item will grant us the status and respect we crave.
And what makes this modern environment uniquely dangerous compared to the past is the systematic eradication of friction.
Friction? What do you mean?
Historically, the act of buying something required physical effort and time. If you wanted a new jacket 50 years ago, you had to physically travel to a store, evaluate the item, look at the price tag, and physically count out paper cash to hand to another human being. That time and effort provided a natural buffer.
A moment to think.
Exactly. A moment for the rational part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, to engage and ask the critical question. Do I actually need this jacket, or do I just want it? Today, the entire e-commerce industry is dedicated to destroying that friction. With innovations like Amazon's one-click ordering, Apple Pay on your phone, and Instagram's seamless in-app checkout, the time elapsed between the initial psychological spark of desire and the finalized financial transaction has been collapsed to literally a matter of seconds.
Yep. I have to interject because it feels like we are swimming in a raging river of highly targeted advertisements, and frictionless spending just took away all the life rafts. How does anyone actually resist this? They have teams of behavioral data scientists optimizing the exact pixel color of the Buy Now button to trigger a dopamine release. And the sources suggest using the 48-hour rule. But isn't that just relying on pure willpower? If I'm stressed and Amazon makes it one click, waiting 48 hours feels impossible. Does that rule actually work in practice, or is it just a nice idea?
It is a fair critique, because relying solely on willpower in an environment designed to drain willpower is a losing strategy. Willpower is a depleting resource. By 8 p.m., after a long day of making decisions, your willpower is gone.
Totally gone.
That is why the 48-hour rule is not about willpower. It is about deliberately reintroducing structural friction into a frictionless system. The rule dictates that for any non-essential purchase over a specific threshold, say $50 or $100, you force yourself to put the item in the digital cart and then you close the browser. You mandate a 2-day waiting period.
And what does that do?
What happens neurologically is that the emotional impulse, the dopamine spike associated with the anticipation of buying, naturally metabolizes and evaporates within that 48-hour window. If you wake up 2 days later and you still logically and genuinely need the item, you purchase it. But the vast majority of the time, the emotional urge has passed, and you often forget you even wanted it. You're using time to defeat the algorithm.
Okay, structural friction. I like that. Strategy 2 is the digital purge. This is about controlling your environment. You cannot desire to buy what you cannot see. Take 1 hour on a Sunday and ruthlessly unsubscribe from every single marketing email hitting your inbox. Unfollow the clothing brands, the tech companies, and the lifestyle influencers whose sole purpose is to make you feel inadequate so they can sell you products on social media. Out of sight, out of mind.
Strategy 3 addresses the psychology of the transaction itself. It leverages a concept known as the pain of paying. Behavioral economics research clearly demonstrates that people spend significantly more money, often 15 to 20% more, when they use credit cards compared to physical cash.
Because it doesn't feel real.
Right, a credit card abstracts the transaction. You tap a piece of plastic against a machine, you get the item immediately, and the consequence, the bill doesn't arrive for 30 days. The neurological pain of losing your resources is deferred. If you find yourself constantly overspending on discretionary categories like dining out or clothes, switch to cash or a debit card for those categories. Handing over physical $20 bills makes the transaction feel real, immediate, and finite. It hurts just a little bit, and that healthy psychological friction naturally regulates your spending behavior.
And strategy 4, utilize America's incredible wealth of free resources. The commercial culture wants you to deeply believe that entertainment, fulfillment, and family bonding must be purchased. It's a lie. We have world-class public library systems that offer far more than books. They offer free movies, internet, museum passes, and community classes. We have massive national and state park systems, hiking trails, free community festivals, and volunteer organizations. You can build a deeply rich, highly engaged life in America without constantly swiping a piece of plastic.
This relentless engineered drive to consume certainly affects our individual wallets on a daily basis. But if we want to truly understand the broader picture, if you want to understand why some families seem to have a massive, unbreakable buffer against this spending pressure, and why other families are living paycheck to paycheck on the terrifying edge of disaster despite working just as hard, we have to zoom out.
Right. Look at the big picture.
We have to look backwards at the historical ledger of the United States, which brings us to the profound reality of the racial wealth gap and generational wealth.
This is a heavy, complex topic, but it is absolutely essential for understanding the actual board we are playing on. It explains why the starting lines are staggered. The sources impartially share the macroeconomic data from the Federal Reserve, and the numbers are incredibly stark. Currently, the median white family in the United States holds approximately 8 times the wealth of the median black family, and about 5 times the wealth of the median Hispanic family. And to be clear, we aren't talking about income, which is what you earn in a given year. We are talking about wealth, the total accumulated value of what you own, like property and investments, minus what you owe.
And to understand the origin of that massive gap, the sources detail the systemic and historical causes. It is vital to recognize that this disparity is not the result of random chance, nor is it a reflection of varying levels of modern-day work ethic. It is the mathematical legacy of centuries of policies that systematically excluded specific demographic groups from the primary mechanisms of American wealth creation. The sources neutrally explain the historical context. It begins with the foundational economic impact of slavery, which extracted generations of uncompensated labor. This was followed by the Jim Crow era, which legally restricted economic mobility. But moving into the 20th century, we see the implementation of highly formalized government-backed mechanisms like redlining.
Let's explain how redlining actually worked mechanically, because it wasn't just a vague attitude, it was a literal map.
Yes. In the 1930s, government-backed agencies like the Homeowners Loan Corporation literally drew red lines on city maps around minority neighborhoods. They explicitly declared these areas hazardous for investment. Because of those red lines, banks systematically denied mortgages to the residents living inside them, regardless of their individual creditworthiness.
Well, they couldn't buy houses.
Right. This practice legally locked millions of Black and minority Americans out of the post-WWII housing boom, which was the single greatest wealth-generating engine in American history. Coupled with discriminatory lending practices and highly unequal access to quality education, which in the U.S. is largely funded by local property taxes, creating a cycle of underfunding in redlined areas, these policies created a compounding disadvantage.
So how does a map drawn in the 1930s or a mortgage denied in the 1950s affect a 25-year-old's bank account today? It's the concept of generational wealth. Wealth cascades down through time. Let's look at a hypothetical cascade. Let's say a white family in the 1950s was able to buy a new suburban house with a highly subsidized government-backed mortgage, while a black family was denied that exact same opportunity due to redlining.
Okay.
Over the next 30 years, the suburbs boom and that house explodes in value. In the 1980s, the parents used the accrued equity in that house to take out a loan to pay for their child's college tuition. That child graduates debt-free, avoiding the student loan parasite we discussed earlier.
Which is a huge head start.
Because they have no monthly debt payments, they have the cash flow to take a risk and start a small business. In the 2010s, that business is wildly successful, and they use the profits to help their own children put down a 20% deposit on their first homes or fund their startups. That is generational wealth in action. It isn't always trust funds and mansions. It is the compounding intergenerational advantage of access to capital.
Conversely, we look at the families that were historically excluded from homeownership, forced into underfunded schools, and subjected to employment discrimination. They had no initial property wealth to build upon. They had no home equity to leverage for their children's education.
Right.
Their children were forced to take on massive student debt to go to college, which delayed their ability to buy homes, which prevented the cycle of wealth creation from ever starting. It is the exact opposite of compound interest. It is compounding disadvantage.
And I want to connect this directly to our listeners right now, especially the immigrants, the international workers, and the first-generation Americans tuning in. This historical context is exactly why the financial game feels so incredibly hard for you. You might be looking around your office at peers who seem to effortlessly buy homes in their 20s or take European vacations, and you wonder what you're doing wrong. You aren't doing anything wrong. You are just starting the race from zero. You are operating without the invisible safety net of generational wealth catching you if you stumble.
But that realization that you are starting from zero is precisely why intentionality is so powerful. Recognizing your position on the board isn't meant to be discouraging or fatalistic. It is meant to fiercely clarify your mission. Your discipline saving, your decision to invest in index funds instead of buying a depreciating luxury car, your fight to purchase property today. These are not just strategies for your own comfortable retirement.
No, they're much more.
For first-generation wealth builders, these actions are the literal structural foundation stones for your family's financial trajectory for the next 100 years. You are the beginning of the cascade.
I love that framing. You are the beginning of the cascade. So we've looked at the macro history of wealth, the big, sweeping systemic forces spanning decades. Now let's zoom all the way back into the micro interactions. How do we apply this weight, this power in our daily lives on a Tuesday afternoon? Let's equip you with the exact words to use in the real world. Welcome to Scripts for Success, Real-World Money Conversations.
Financial literacy is almost always taught as a series of math equations on a spreadsheet. But in practical reality, personal finance is usually a conversation with another human being. And possessing the right script, the right framing, can dramatically alter the financial outcome of that conversation.
Let's do some rapid-fire role plays. I'm going to set the scene. Scenario 1. The landlord. You are currently renting an apartment, your 1-year lease is up, and your landlord just emailed you a notice saying they're raising your rent from $1,600 to $1,800 a month. That's a huge jump. Most people just accept it, grumble, and pay, or they pack up and move. But here is the script to negotiate. I'll be the tenant, you be the landlord, let's run it.
Okay, ready?
Hey, Mr. Thompson, I received the notice about the rent increase. I've really loved living here the past 2 years. I think you'd agree I've been a reliable tenant, I've always paid on time, and I've kept the place in great shape.
I appreciate that. I really do. You've been great. But my property taxes and insurance premiums have gone up significantly this year. I simply have to raise the rent to $1,800 to cover my costs.
I completely understand that costs are rising on your end, and I want this to work for both of us. I actually looked at the current market data for our specific neighborhood, and comparable units of this size are renting for about $1,650 to $1,750 right now.
Wow.
I'd love to propose meeting in the middle at $1,725. And to give you peace of mind and help you avoid the high costs of turning over the unit to a stranger, I'd be willing to sign a 2-year lease today instead of a 1-year lease.
Now, let's stop and analyze why that script works so effectively. The tenant did not complain about how expensive their own life is, because frankly, the landlord's math doesn't care about the tenant's budget.
Right.
Instead, the tenant anchored their own value first, reminding the landlord that finding a clean, reliable tenant who pays on time is hard and risky. They brought objective market data, proving that asking for $1,800 is a statistical overreach. But the masterstroke is the concession, offering a 2-year lease.
It's a 2-year lease.
What the tenant understands is the landlord's true fear. turnover costs. If the tenant moves out over a $70 dispute, the landlord has to clean the apartment, perhaps paint it, pay a broker fee to find a new tenant, and risk the unit sitting completely vacant for a month, losing $1,600 entirely. The tenant solved the landlord's primary financial fear in exchange for a lower monthly rate.
Brilliant. Understand their fear and solve it. Scenario 2, HR and job benefits. You just got the job offer, you successfully negotiated the base salary using our earlier steps, and now you have to clarify the incredibly confusing corporate benefits package. I'll be the candidate, you be the HR representative.
That's good.
Thank you so much for sending over the offer. I was reviewing the benefits package and had a quick question about the 401k retirement plan. What is the exact employer match? And crucially, what is the vesting schedule?
Sure. We match 50% of your contributions up to 6% of your total salary, and it operates on a 4-year graded vesting schedule.
Let's pause the role play. I need to know what that actually means. What is a vesting schedule? Because it sounds like they're keeping my money hostage.
In a way, they are. A vesting schedule dictates when the employer's matched money actually legally belongs to you. Imagine a company puts $5,000 in a safe with your name on it, but they put a timer on the lock. If it's a 4-year graded schedule, it means you might only own 25% of that match after year 1, 50% after year 2, and so on.
Oh, I see.
If it's a cliff vesting schedule, you might own 0% until you hit exactly 3 years of employment, and then you own it all. Asking about the vesting schedule is crucial because if you plan to leave the company after 2 years, you need to calculate that you might be leaving thousands of dollars of free money behind in that safe.
Okay, back to the role play. Got it. And looking at the health insurance options, could you clarify the strategic difference between the standard PPO option and the high deductible health plan with the HSA?
Absolutely. The PPO has a low $500 deductible, but a higher monthly premium taken out of your check. The HDHP has a much higher $3,000 deductible, but the monthly premiums are very low. And as a benefit, the company actually deposits $1,000 a year directly into your health savings account.
Pausing again. Why would I ever choose a plan where I have to pay $3,000 before insurance kicks in?
Because if you are young and generally healthy, the HSA, the health savings account, is arguably the most powerful investment vehicle in America. It is the only account that is triple tax advantaged.
Triple.
Yes. The money goes in tax-free, it grows tax-free if you invest it, and you can withdraw it tax-free for medical expenses. Many wealthy people use the HDHP not for the insurance, but simply to access the HSA as a shadow retirement account, paying out of pocket for minor medical issues and letting the HSA money compound for decades.
Okay, concluding the role play. That's really helpful context for the HSA. Lastly, I see the initial offer includes 15 days of paid time off. Given my 5 years of industry experience, I was hoping we could bump that PTO to 20 days to align with what I'm currently receiving.
And again, as we discussed earlier, negotiating PTO is often much easier for HR to approve than altering the base salary because it doesn't require direct cash outlay.
Scenario 3, the financial advisor. Let's say you are a 32-year-old immigrant. You are finally making decent money, but you have $22,000 in student loans sitting at a 5.5% interest rate. You sit down with a fiduciary financial advisor. How do you approach the age-old agonizing question? Do I pay down the debt or do I invest in the stock market?
In this scenario, the optimal script revolves around what is called a split approach. The advisor would first verify your foundation. Once you have a cash emergency fund covering 4 months of essential expenses, the script you use to direct the strategy becomes, I want to aggressively tackle this debt to get it out of my life, but mathematically I know I cannot afford to lose the compounding power of my 30s in the stock market.
Okay, so you split it.
So you instruct the advisor to split your available monthly surplus. You max out your annual Roth IRA contribution, which is $7,000 a year currently, investing it in a simple, low-cost 80-20 split of domestic and international index funds. And simultaneously, you allocate any remaining extra cash directly toward the principal of the 5.5% student loan. You are building future wealth and destroying past debt at the exact same time, perfectly balancing mathematical optimization with the psychological peace of mind of seeing the debt shrink.
I love that. Optimization and peace of mind. Okay, scenario 4. This is the hardest one, emotionally. The friend borrowing money. Your good friend, someone you really care about, comes to you looking desperate and says, hey, my car broke down. It's $1,500 to fix the transmission. I am completely broke until payday. Can you please lend me the money? I swear on my life I'll pay you back next month.
This specific interaction destroys more friendships than almost anything else. The script here is entirely about depersonalizing the refusal so the relationship survives. You say, I am so incredibly sorry you're dealing with this. Car trouble is the absolute worst stress. I want to be honest with you because our friendship means a lot to me. I have a strict personal rule that I simply do not lend money to friends or family because I've seen it ruin relationships in the past, and I value you too much to risk that. But I absolutely want to help you figure this out. Can I come over and help you research cheaper mechanics or look into financing options at the repair shop?
Using the phrase personal rule is pure magic because what you're doing is removing yourself as the judge. It means you aren't rejecting them because you think they are irresponsible or bad with money. You are simply adhering to a rigid boundary you set for yourself long ago. It takes the personal sting out of the rejection. And the golden rule from our sources is incredibly clear on this. If you do ultimately cave and you decide to give them the $1,500, you must mentally and emotionally categorize it as a gift. Never expect to see that money again. If they eventually pay you back, it's a wonderful, pleasant surprise. If they don't, you haven't lost your money and your friend. You just gave a gift.
Precisely. That mental framing protects your emotional capital just as fiercely as it protects your financial capital.
Okay, last one. Scenario 5, the bill negotiation. This is pure tactics. Let's say your home internet bill has quietly, slowly crept up from $60 a month to $89 a month over the last 2 years. You call the customer retention department. Hi there. I was reviewing my budget and noticed my bill has slowly gone up to $89. I've been a loyal customer for 3 years and I genuinely love to stay with your service, but I saw that AT&T is currently offering the exact same fiber speed in my neighborhood for $55 a month. Is there any promotional rate you can apply to lower my current bill so I don't have to go through the hassle of switching providers?
The agent, following their own script, will likely counteroffer. They might say they can drop it to $75. You politely hold your ground and ask if they can match the $60. They check with the supervisor, and they say the absolute best they can do is lock you in at $65 for the next 12 months. You accept. The tactic here relies on mentioning a specific local competitor and citing their specific promotional price.
Right, showing you did the work.
This proves to the agent that you have done the actual research and are a genuine flight risk. Furthermore, by explicitly expressing a desire to stay, you activate their internal customer retention metrics. Corporate math dictates that it is vastly cheaper to discount an existing paying customer by $20 a month than it is to spend hundreds of marketing dollars acquiring a brand new one.
So what does this all mean when we look at the big picture? It means your words literally have an hourly rate attached to them. Think about the math of what just happened. That phone call to the internet company took maybe 10 minutes out of your day. You successfully lowered your monthly bill by $24. Over the course of a year, that is $288 saved. You just paid yourself $288 for 10 minutes of talking. If you extrapolate that, that is an hourly rate of over $1,700 an hour. Learn the scripts. Practice the words.
It is a remarkable, almost absurd return on investment for simply overcoming the minor social friction of asking a question.
Now, using the right words can definitely save you money on old school traditional bills like cable, internet, and rent. But what about the newest, loudest, and frankly most confusing conversation in modern finance? Let's transition into the digital realm. Let's talk about the Wild West of navigating cryptocurrency.
Cryptocurrency can no longer be ignored or dismissed simply as a fringe internet experiment. It is fully integrated into mainstream finance, with Wall Street firms launching ETFs and major companies holding it on their balance sheets. But the gap between how crypto is aggressively marketed online by influencers promising utopian wealth and how it actually functions within the rigid confines of the American legal and tax framework is dangerously massive.
And the most important practical reality for anyone living, working, and paying taxes in the U.S. is how the Internal Revenue Service views it. The IRS does not treat Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any other coin as a currency. They treat it as property.
This is a foundational structural distinction that trips up millions of new investors. If you view Bitcoin purely as a digital currency, you assume you can just buy a cup of coffee with it, hand the barista some digital change, and that's the end of the transaction, just like using a dollar bill.
But it's not.
Because the IRS classifies it as property, like a stock or a piece of real estate. Every single time you sell crypto for cash, trade one type of crypto for another, or use it to purchase goods and services, it triggers a taxable event. Let's look at an example. If you buy a single Bitcoin when it is priced at $20,000, and you hold it until it goes up to $50,000, and then you sell it to pay off your car, you legally owe capital gains tax on that $30,000 of profit.
Wow.
If you use a fraction of that Bitcoin to buy a $5 coffee, you technically owe capital gains tax on the fractional profit realized during that $5 transaction. If you don't meticulously track those transactions and report them, you are committing tax evasion.
And beyond the absolute tax nightmare of tracking every digital coffee purchase, there is the reality of the asset itself. The loudest warning from our experts in the sources is about extreme volatility. We are talking about an asset class that routinely experiences 20 to 50% price swings in a matter of weeks, driven by sentiment, regulatory news, or even just a tweet from a billionaire.
Which means it must be categorized accurately in your mind. It is a highly speculative, high-risk investment. It is not a digital savings account. It is not a place to park your emergency fund. You never, ever put money into cryptocurrency that you might need to access in the next 3 to 5 years to pay rent, fix your car, or cover a medical deductible.
So if someone is listening to this and they understand the tax implications and they understand the volatility, but they still want to participate because they believe in the technology, what are the best practices to survive the Wild West?
If you participate, you must build a fortress. First, only use major regulated U.S.-compliant exchanges like Coinbase, Kraken, or Gemini. Do not chase obscure coins on unregulated offshore exchanges. Second, you absolutely must enable two-factor authentication, or 2FA, on your accounts using a dedicated authenticator app like Google Authenticator or Authy.
Don't use texts.
Right. Do not rely on SMS text messages for your 2FA, as scammers easily execute SIM-swapping hack to intercept your texts and drain your accounts. Third, use software to keep obsessive, meticulous records of every single purchase, sale, and transfer for your tax returns to avoid audits. And finally, the golden rule for portfolio allocation. If you decide to invest in cryptocurrency, it should represent a maximum of 5 to 10% of your total overall investment portfolio. If you have $10,000 invested in total, only $500 to $1,000 should be in crypto. It is the highly volatile, risky icing on the cake. It's not the cake itself.
Okay. We've gone incredibly deep today. We've given you the tactical rules for navigating almost everything. You know how to negotiate your starting salary with the pause and the counteroffer. You know how to diffuse the student loan parasite. You know the banking regulations that scammers exploit. You know how to deduct mileage in the gig economy. And you know the tax implications of Bitcoin.
It's a lot of tools.
But tactics without an overarching strategy are ultimately useless. You can perfectly optimize your 401k match, completely dodge the check-washing scammers, and successfully lower your internet bill by $20 a month. But if you don't know why you are doing all of this, you will eventually burn out. So let's close today by zooming all the way out from the spreadsheets to the most important financial decision you will ever make in America. Let's discuss redefining the American dream and the philosophy of money.
This is where the cold, hard mechanics of finance intersect with the meaning of your life. Every culture on Earth operates with an underlying philosophy of money. The core American financial philosophy is highly individualistic, deeply competitive, and aggressively consumerist. The unspoken but constantly broadcast message is that more is always intrinsically better, that your personal success is visually demonstrated to your peers through consumption and luxury goods, and perhaps most dangerously, that your net financial worth is directly correlated to your self-worth as a human being.
But if you are coming from a different culture, or if you were raised by immigrant parents, that individualistic philosophy might feel deeply alienating and hollow. In many cultures around the world, wealth is fundamentally viewed through a communal lens. The primary goal of making money isn't to buy a bigger, empty house for yourself in the suburbs. It's to ensure your aging parents are comfortably cared for, or to pool resources to support your extended family back in your home country. In other cultures, frugality, simplicity, and a lack of ostentatious display are seen as high moral virtues, not signs that you are failing at the game of capitalism.
And operating between those two worlds creates a profound psychological tension for immigrants, international workers, and first-generation Americans. You feel constantly forced to choose between the aggressive wealth accumulation dictated by your new home and the communal, grounded values of your heritage. You feel guilty if you spend and guilty if you don't. But the most empowering insight we can extract from all these sources, the hybrid approach, is that you do not have to choose one or the other.
You don't.
You are entirely allowed to take the highly effective mechanical tools of the American system, building an 800 credit score, leveraging compound interest, utilizing index funds, maxing out pre-tax retirement accounts, and point those powerful tools directly at the values of your home culture. You can aggressively, fiercely negotiate your corporate salary, not to buy a luxury sports car, but to fund a community project back home, or to ensure your nieces and nephews graduate debt-free. You can leverage American financial mechanics to serve non-American financial values.
That is so freeing to hear. You get to define what success looks like on your own terms. Which brings us to the ultimate question. Buried in all these sources, past the tax codes and the bankruptcy exemptions, is the single most powerful financial tool in existence. It's not a budgeting app, it's not a complex Excel spreadsheet, and it's not a stock tip. It is a single question that you must ask yourself before every major transaction, before you take on a massive debt, before you accept a high-stress job offer. You have to ask, does this expenditure, does this decision bring me closer to the life I actually want, or is it just noise?
That question is your compass. It cuts through the 10,000 advertisements a day. It cuts through the exhausting pressure to keep up with your neighbors. Does this bring me closer to the life I actually want? If you spend the time to define exactly what you want clearly, whether that is early retirement on a farm, traveling the world, or just having the peace of mind to sleep through the night without worrying about bills, saying no to everything else the culture tries to sell you becomes incredibly easy.
I want to take a moment and speak directly to our listeners right now, especially those of you who are navigating this incredibly complex, occasionally hostile, and fundamentally alien financial system, and doing it in a second or third language. Operating without the safety net of generational wealth, without parents who can sit down and explain how a great investing schedule works, having to decode everything from FICO credit scores to federal tax brackets entirely on your own. It is genuinely heroic. Most people never attempt to learn an entirely new operating system from scratch. The fact that you are here, listening to this deep dive, taking mental notes, and actively applying this knowledge means you are already winning. You are altering the trajectory of your life and the trajectory of your family's future for generations to come.
It is an act of immense courage and profound resilience. And to close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought. It is an idea that builds on everything we've discussed today, from the salary negotiations to the gig economy taxes, but it challenges the very core premise of the game itself. We spend so much of our time and energy figuring out how to acquire more, how to optimize, how to accumulate, how to build the biggest pile of resources. But what if true financial freedom in America isn't achieved by winning the game of accumulation? What if it's achieved by actively choosing to play a completely different game entirely? What if the ultimate wealth hack, the absolute most powerful thing you can do in a hyper-capitalist society, is simply redefining the word enough? When you deliberately decide that you have enough, the entire system loses its power over you.
Wow. When you define enough, the system loses its power over you. I love that. Think about the operating system we started with. The tip of the iceberg, the user interface, is just the transactions. But the massive foundation underneath, the part that actually supports the weight of your life, that is your intentionality. That is your philosophy. We want to thank every single one of you for listening, whether you are tuning in from a subway in New York, a cafe in Nairobi, a commute in Dallas, or a desk in Da Nang. You are building so much more than just financial literacy today. You are building a life of profound competence and deep, lasting connection.
The knowledge is yours now. Step out of the default mode and apply it.
Stay curious, stay empowered, and keep diving deep. Until next time.